Chapter 242. How can this thing emit light? There's actually no smoke at all. Shiqing Kozhihai, Tongzhinya, Qin Chuan, Tuwan, and a few other big shots surrounded the 2 floor lamps in Yangxin Palace Hall, and exclaimed in admiration. The Empress stood in front of a mirror not far away, and ignored the people behind her. This thing stores sunlight before releasing it. Therefore, it doesn't require lamp oil or smoke. Ren Baqian said nonsense to the group of country bumpkins. It's indeed a treasure. Everyone nodded after hearing this. Deputy Prefect Ren, do you still have this treasure? Tongzhinya asked. Of course not. In fact, it wasn't a big problem to give each of these big shots a solar battery, but Ren Baqian didn't have any intention of giving them something that was ahead of the times. The Empress had some understanding of Earth, but in the eyes of these people, this thing was more magical. It wouldn't be a good thing if it was everywhere. Things like walkie-talkies were too useful. There was no need for solar batteries and lamps as they were meaningless. The group of people surrounded the floor lamps and exclaimed in admiration for a long time, fully satisfying the Empress's desire to show off. Ren Baqian felt that she invited so many people to have a meal in the palace, just to show off this new toy. Although there weren't many of these things on Earth, they were still very magical in this world. Previously, so many people were doubtful about her choice of a husband. At this moment, she was able to use the electric lamps on Earth to scare those big shots. This made her feel much better. During lunch, everyone was full of praise for the food in the palace. The 2 shameless old men, Tongzhinya and Qin Chuan, immediately licked the plates. Everyone was also very tempted by the spices that Ren Baqian took out. Although there were some spices planted in the Beast Park, it would take some time for them to mature. Furthermore, the amount was not enough to make anything. They could only hope that Ren Baqian would quickly add more spices. After lunch, Tongzhinya pulled Ren Baqian to one side and said, I heard that Deputy Prefect Ren wants to buy land? I have a few hundred acres of land, and can transfer some to you. What do you think, Deputy Prefect Ren? Sir Tong, it's not me who wants to buy land, it's Her Majesty who wants to buy land. Ren Baqian immediately corrected Tongzhinya. However, Tongzhinya's ears were really sharp. Tung Hulu and Tai Dao had only been out for 2 days, and he already knew about it. In fact, Ren Baqian had forgotten about one thing. That day at the Beast Park, he mentioned that he was going to look for some land to plant spices. It's all the same. Tongzhinya replied indifferently. The imperial family had not bought any land for many years. Everyone knew whose idea it was to suddenly buy land. How many mu of land can Sir Tong transfer? What do you want? Ren Baqian asked. He didn't believe that Tongzhinya was inspired by Her Majesty, and immediately sold a portion of his family's land to the Empress, after knowing that she wanted to buy land. 50 mu. Spices, at least 10 mu of spices. I won't take them for free, just sell them to me. Tongzhinya immediately said. Ren Baqian felt that this amount was pretty good. 50 mu of land wasn't a small amount. This morning, Tung Hulu came to the palace and said that the fields around Lan City were distributed to the soldiers who had rendered meritorious service when the country was founded. Although the annual harvest was not much, not many people were willing to sell. Although they could buy spices, they were scattered all over the place and were far from Ren Baqian's requirements. I can only sell them to you for 3 years, Ren Baqian added. What if I transfer 100 mu of land to you? Tongzhinya thought for a while and asked. I will sell 20 mu of spices to you for 5 years. There is no need for more than that. By then, the production of spices should be very large, and you should be able to buy them easily, Ren Baqian said. In fact, if they were to plant their own spices, they might not even need 5 years. However, they couldn't possibly plant the spices the moment the Empress planted them, right? Wouldn't that be snatching food from the mouth of the imperial family? Ren Baqian felt that 5 years was more or less enough. Tongzhinya thought for a while and nodded his head in agreement. Other than the spices for his own use, the rest of the spices could be sold to Great Xia and the Yun nation. He should be able to earn quite a lot. Tongzhinya was a businessman who was held back by the Ministry of Works. Although there were not many business-minded people in Dayo, there were still some. Especially people like Tongzhinya. I will take my leave first. Tongjianye looked at Tu Wan and nodded his head at Renbaqian. Tu Wan and Tongjianye had the same goal, so Renbaqian gave Tongjianye the same exchange plan. It had to be said that the officials in Dayo didn't have much land in their hands. Rank 3 officials like Tongjianye and Tu Wan, who were already at the top, actually had a few hundred to 1,000 mu of land in their hands. If Renbaqian didn't hear it with his own ears, he wouldn't dare to believe it. Even on the surface, it was still too little. Furthermore, what the two of them said might be true. The Aboriginals actually didn't care much about land because these lands were distributed to the meritorious soldiers in the past. It was more of a kind of glory for them to keep the land near Lan City. In the afternoon, the Empress and Renbaqian stood at the martial arts arena in the palace. This was the first time Renbaqian knew that there was such a place in the palace. There were many stone locks, stone balls, and other things in the surroundings. Watch my moves. The Empress was still wearing her red muslin dress. After she finished speaking, she stood there and practiced a set of boxing techniques. When she started her first move, Renbaqian's mind immediately shifted away from the Empress's figure. Austere. This was Renbaqian's first feeling. As soon as the Empress started her moves, Renbaqian felt a murderous aura around him, as if he was on a battlefield. Mighty. The Empress's moves weren't fast or complicated, but every punch made an explosive sound in the air, as if the air had exploded. More importantly, the Empress's slow punches actually had the imposing manner of a magnificent army, making people unable to stand in front of her and subconsciously retreat. Boom. As the Empress slapped the air, 6 or 7 1-meter square slabs in front of her exploded. Your Majesty's martial arts are unparalleled and unparalleled. Invincible in the East, I am the only one. Renbaqian woke up from the feeling of being on a battlefield, and immediately shouted. The Empress's tone was a little higher, and seemed to be a little mischievous. Following which, her voice became cold again and asked, "Did you see it clearly?" Renbaqian was speechless. Your Majesty, I only care about using my eyes to pursue your heroic appearance. Renbaqian laughed dryly. The Empress raised her eyebrows and stared intently at Renbaqian. I personally went down to demonstrate for you, yet you were actually distracted? Just now, I saw a murderous aura around me, as if I was on a battlefield. Your Majesty, you were invincible in the midst of a magnificent army, but I was too slow to see this move, Renbaqian quickly said. Chapter 243. Renbaqian's upper body was exposed as he stood in the middle of the arena. Over the past few months, he had grown quite a bit of muscle. At the very least, his original ribs were nowhere to be seen. At this moment, his eyes were filled with determination as he stared at his opponent. Even if Chen Qing was beside him, he wouldn't be able to recognize this sharp-eyed, sword-like, ruthless man. He was actually his friend, who many people thought was ordinary and unremarkable. The laptop behind him was connected to the sound system, and was playing the song, Into the Battlefield. It was a hot-blooded high school soundtrack. When he watched this movie, this music simply made his blood boil. At this moment, the strong rhythm and dense drumming made Renbaqian's adrenaline surge, and his fighting spirit surge. He felt that if he had a gun, he would be able to carry it onto the battlefield. At this moment, Renbaqian's opponent's attention was obviously attracted by the thing that was making the sound not far behind him. His gaze wandered and was fixated on the sound system. Chance! Renbaqian's eyes lit up. He stomped on the ground and dashed toward his opponent like a wild dog released from its leash. Bang! Then he flew back at a faster speed and landed heavily on the ground with a 46-yard large footprint on his chest. Ouch! Renbaqian groaned as he lay on the ground. Your Majesty, I need to change my opponent. You can choose from the Imperial Guards. The Empress, who was eating popcorn not far away, said generously. Can I lower the age of the Imperial Guard? I haven't even reached the manual level. Renbaqian cried. How? Renbaqian's current Imperial Guard was about 30 years old. For the Aboriginals, he hadn't reached the peak yet. Furthermore, the Imperial Guards weren't the most skilled. At the same level, the winged cavalry was slightly stronger than the Imperial Guards. I feel that I can give it a try with an opponent around 10 years old. Renbaqian seriously stated his request. The Empress almost laughed at Renbaqian's shameless behavior. Qing Yuan and Hong Wuan looked at him with disdain. Could he be any more shameless? Meanwhile, Renbaqian's opponent was looking at the sky at a 45-degree angle. He didn't even use 5% of his strength just now. What else did he want? Isn't this a form of sparring? With my current strength, I'm still no match for him even if his hands and feet are tied up. Renbaqian got up from the ground and pleaded earnestly. The Empress squinted at him for a long time and finally said, "Okay." Renbaqian was overjoyed when he heard this. "Your Majesty, you are accomplished in both literature and martial arts. You are benevolent to the common people, and are willing to deliver all living things from suffering. Let's continue today. I will change your opponent for the sparring session the day after tomorrow," the Empress said. Alas! Renbaqian sighed and struck a pose. Then he stepped to the rhythm of a song by Nightwish, and charged toward his opponent like a wild dog that had escaped its leash. Bang! This was the 7th day since the Empress started teaching him the fist technique. These 7 days could be said to be filled with tears and snot. Just the 8 moves of the Fist of Death were enough to make Renbaqian suffer. Renbaqian's bones had already taken shape, and there were many movements that he couldn't perform. Then, the Empress ordered 2 imperial guards to press down on his shoulders and form a straight line. At that time, his voice was like the sound of a pig being slaughtered, and it spread throughout the entire palace for a long time. For 3 days in a row, Renbaqian's legs were splayed outwards when he walked. It felt like his legs were like noodles. He had to practice martial arts every day, but this was still okay. At most, it would be a little tiring. He still had to get beaten up every 2 days, and this made Renbaqian's heart full of regrets. Today, he finally couldn't help but bring up the idea that he had been pondering over for a few days. At night, a female official helped to disperse the extravasated blood on his body. Renbaqian's body was also smeared with a layer of Indian divine oil. This was what Renbaqian called it. After applying the oil, his whole body would reflect light. However, the effect was indeed excellent. Every time he was smeared with Indian divine oil to disperse the extravasated blood, his whole body would feel comfortable. The next day, not a single scar could be seen on his body. However, he didn't know that only a small number of aboriginals could afford this Indian divine oil. Even though it wasn't considered priceless, it was still extremely expensive. Even the children of the court officials could only use it occasionally. It was impossible for them to rub it all over their body every 2 days like Renbaqian. A bottle of this medicine cost 100 taels of silver. Using 1 bottle at a time would cost more than 10,000 taels of silver a year. Even for the Empress, this was considered a considerable amount. Caretaker Sure was a rank 9 official, and his monthly salary was only 6 taels of silver. The annual rent for a shop on Jinyang Street was only slightly more than 100 taels of silver. The medicine used for the medicinal bath was even more expensive. A single medicinal bath cost 1,000 taels of silver, and could only last for 7 days. Just the 2 medicines that Renbaqian used cost 50,000 taels of silver a year. Dayo wasn't rich. The entire imperial palace only spent 40,000 taels of silver a year. Most of it was spent on the salaries of the imperial guards, female officials, and maids. Renbaqian's expenses alone were more than the annual expenses of the entire imperial palace. The Empress could only rely on the income from the gold and silver mines for a small surplus. Coupled with the expenses on Renbaqian, the imperial palace's income immediately became a deficit. The next day, Renbaqian hurriedly went out and met up with Feng Ho, the director of the Department of Ordnance, and Tong Yan, the director of the Department of Construction. He received news in the morning that the pile of bricks used to burn the furnace had been produced. However, they had all turned into slag. Along the way, Renbaqian sat on the back of the fork-horned cow and pondered the reason behind the bumpy ride. Since cement could be produced from burning, then some of the ores in this world should be similar to those on Earth. Furthermore, the main ingredient for burning bricks was clay. Such a situation shouldn't have occurred. When he arrived at the Jingtian furnace, the supervisor, Tai Mu, hurriedly welcomed him. "Sir. Yesterday, the The furnace fire was extinguished. We wanted to follow your instructions to take out the bricks, only to find out. Let's wait and see. Renbachian waved his hand and hurriedly rushed to the furnace. The bricks inside had not been taken out yet. Renbachian went down the ladder and saw that only half of the bricks were left. The rest had turned into slag and fell to the bottom of the furnace. The remaining bricks looked cracked on the surface. Many of them were bulging. When he touched them with his hand, they immediately turned into fragments. Renbachian frowned. What was going on? Sir Ren, how is it? Tong Yin shouted from above. After drinking together at the brothel, everyone was very familiar with each other. Renbachian frowned and climbed out of the furnace with dust all over his body. He said to Taimu, "Do it again. I want to see what the problem is." Then he said to Tong Yin, "I'm not sure. Let's see." While the craftsman of the Jingtian furnace was working, Renbachian took out a piece of paper and compared it step by step to see which step was the problem. "There's no problem," Renbachian muttered. He personally saw the craftsman of the Jingtian furnace crushing, stirring, and kneading the bricks step by step. There was no problem at all. Could it be that there's something wrong with this piece of paper? Renbachian started to suspect if there was a problem with the information he found. There might be something that wasn't written on this piece of paper. "Sir Run, what's this?" Tong Yin and Feng Ho leaned their heads over. Just now, they saw him holding a piece of paper and mumbling to himself. "I remember some things," Renbachian replied casually. In any case, the two of them couldn't understand it. "I've never seen this kind of writing before." Tong Yin glanced at it and shook his head. Renbachian ignored him. It would be strange if he had seen it before. "Hey, what are you guys doing?" Renbachian looked at the craftsman as he sent the kneaded bricks into the furnace. "Sir, you said to burn it." The craftsman looked at him blankly. Dry it in the shade first. How are we going to burn it if we send it in like this?" Renbachian's eyes widened. It was clearly written on the paper that it had to be dried in the shade. "Sir, you told us to burn it in this way the last time." Taimu was dumbfounded. "How is that possible? The bricks haven't even dried yet. How can they be burned?" Renbachian stared at him. "Sir Run, you didn't say to dry it in the shade the last time. This is how we burn it," Feng Ho said righteously. Renbachian looked at Feng Ho with disdain and said, "How is that possible?" He thought to himself, "Damn it, did you really not say it the last time?" Thinking about it carefully, it seemed that the last time, the cement and the bricks were all done in one day. How could there be time to dry it in the shade? Chapter 244. Renbachian faced his opponent with a solemn look. After being beaten up a few times, the Empress finally changed his opponent. Following his shameless request, she changed his opponent to a 10-year-old child. Not only that, it was a girl. She was dressed in white silk clothes and had delicate skin. She looked like a delicious Lolita. Upon seeing this Lolita, Renbachian's mind was filled with the death penalty of at least 3 years in prison. "Your Majesty, I can't do it." Renbachian frowned for a long time before sighing and turning his head to look at the Empress. "If you can win, I will give you a reward." The Empress's voice carried a hint of charm. Renbachian listened to the Empress's voice and didn't get carried away. The fact that the Empress dared to say such a thing clearly showed that he couldn't beat this Lolita. "Why don't you change your opponent to an 8-year-old? The Empress, Qing Yuan, Hong Yuan, the Imperial Guards, and even the Lolita were shocked. Each and every one of them widened their eyes. "Can you be any more shameless?" "I'm just joking. Why don't you change your opponent to a boy?" Renbachian laughed mischievously. If it was a boy, he should be able to do it. "Defeat her first," the Empress said while eating shaved ice. Renbachian sighed, lowered his head, and jogged over. He opened his notebook and played Night Wish She's Mystical in. The atmosphere immediately exploded. The little Loli stared curiously at the 2 big boxes that were producing the sound with a pair of cute eyes. Her fingers subconsciously followed the rhythm of Night Wish song. "How do I address you?" Renbachian finally put on a serious look, cupped his fists at the Lolita, and said calmly. The Lolita glanced at him, cupped her fists and said, "Tonglan." Rinpoche felt that this Lolita was definitely not from an ordinary family. Her silk clothes weren't something that an ordinary person could afford. When he heard her surname was Tong, he subconsciously felt that she might be related to Tong Jinya. How is she related to the Minister of Works, Sir Tong? Rinpoche asked again. That's my grandfather, Tong Lan said softly. Oh, as expected. Rinpoche nodded. Then he said, a few days ago, I went to a brothel with your grandfather. Oh. The little loli nodded without any reaction. Come on, one look and I can tell that you don't know what a brothel is. You have wasted your words, Rinpoche thought to himself when he saw her acting like this. At this moment, the Empress's cold voice sounded beside his ear. You really can't forget it. Why don't I accompany you? This subject is using tactics. As the saying goes, attacking the heart is the best. The best strategy is to attack the stratagem. Rinpoche saw that the little Lolita didn't have any reaction, but the Empress reacted first. He immediately turned around and spoke in a deadpan manner. Everyone had a look of contempt on their faces. Don't you have any shame? Rinpoche helplessly turned his head and looked at the obviously absent-minded Lolita. He crouched down slightly and exerted force with his legs to scuttle forward. Unparalleled vanguard! Rinpoche shouted. When the crowd saw him make his move, they finally perked up. Then, when they saw his legs kick 6 times in a row, their faces twitched. This move was clearly a horse-stomping chain kick. The moves of the Fist of Death were simple and ferocious. It was considered a widely spread fist technique in the army. Even if the crowd had not practiced it before, they more or less had some understanding of it. When they saw him make his move, they immediately realized that what he shouted and what he used were 2 completely different moves. The opponent was a 10-year-old child. Yet he was still so shameless. These few days, Rinpoche had once again refreshed everyone's impression of how shameless he was. Bang! Rinpoche's nostrils spurted out blood as he fell to the ground. There was a small footprint on his face. Tong Lan lowered her head and looked at Rinpoche, who was lying on the ground with a look of disdain. Liar! Rinpoche covered his face. He couldn't even defeat a 10-year-old girl. There was no way he could continue living like this. Everyone looked up at the sky. A moment later, Rinpoche, who had another footprint on the left side of his face, stood opposite Tong Lan again. Do you know how much 3,000 taels of silver is? How long is it enough for the Tong residents to spend? Rinpoche asked with a serious look on his face. Of course I know. My monthly allowance is only 3 taels of silver. The Tong residents' monthly expenditure is also less than 1,000 taels of silver. Tong Lan raised her small face and replied, I owe your grandfather 3,000 taels of silver. If you slap my face again, I won't return the money, Rinpoche threatened. The Empress, Hong Yuan and Qing Yuan. The Imperial Guards, Tong Lan. Tong Lan widened her eyes. Before today, she had never thought that someone could be so shameless. Chance. Rinpoche saw that she was distracted and immediately shouted, 100 battles on the battlefield. Both of his fists stretched out and stirred, creating an indomitable momentum. Everyone watched helplessly as he shouted, 100 battles on the battlefield. But in reality, he was using unparalleled vanguard. Bang! Rinpoche held his stomach and fell head first onto the stone slab. I didn't slap his face this time. It's only right and proper to repay a debt. Grandfather said that if someone owes you money and doesn't return it, you should beat him until he returns it. Tong Lan lowered her head and said seriously. Rinpoche suffered a lot from this day. Finally, he sadly realized that he couldn't even defeat a 10-year-old child. Even if the other party was Tong Jinya's granddaughter and had practiced martial arts since young, she was still a 10-year-old child. Sitting in Yangxin Palace Hall, the Empress saw his downcast face and finally couldn't help but say something. Now that you know the difference in strength, you just have to work harder in the future. Your Majesty. Rinpoche raised his head gratefully. How about changing it to an 8-year-old opponent? I can't thank you enough. The Empress felt like slapping Rinpoche to death. Why didn't she realize that he was so shameless in the past? Your Majesty, the Aboriginals are indeed blessed by the heavens. Their individual strength is peerless, and I still need to work harder. Renbaqian immediately corrected himself. The Empress's expression became better. She took out a piece of paper from under the cushion on the couch and threw it to Renbaqian. Take a look. Renbaqian received the paper doubtfully and opened it to carefully read the words on it. After a while, Renbaqian raised his head in bewilderment and asked, Poison warrior? Jiasu had lived his entire life with such a title, and now it was pinned on him? Would Jiasu be so angry that he would jump out of his coffin? The Empress nodded slightly and said, Previously in Great Xia, we poisoned about 8,000 people to death with sarin gas. Including the ones killed by the winged cavalry, Great Xia lost a total of 13,000 people. In addition, the 9 pavilions were also destroyed. After investigating for a long time, Great Xia determined that you were the culprit. After all, no one in Dayo is good at using poison, and you are the most suspicious. Great Xia might assassinate you. After all, according to their judgment, your existence is too dangerous to Great Xia, second only to the general-in-chief who supports the nation, Hongwu. I feel that the people they sent are already on their way. Renbaqian continued to be bewildered. However, they didn't accuse you unjustly. Even though you didn't do it personally, it's almost the same. Furthermore, at the Falling Moon Gorge, you were the one who poisoned 2,000 people to death. You should be considered a meritorious deed, the Empress added. Renbaqian looked aggrieved and said, Is it better for me to not leave the palace these few days? You can hide for a while, but you can't hide forever. You will have to leave the palace eventually. Therefore, practice your martial arts diligently and have more ability to protect yourself. The Empress frowned. The strength of the people that Great Xia sent to assassinate Renbaqian next time would probably not be the same as the previous 4. This made the Empress somewhat worried. However, there were still many things that Renbaqian needed to do. He couldn't possibly hole himself up in the palace forever, right? Chapter 245. When Renbaqian returned to Earth, he immediately went to bed. These days he was physically and mentally exhausted and traumatized. He had to deal with all sorts of things in the morning, practice martial arts in the afternoon, and rest only in the evening. Every other day, he had to be ravaged by a Lolita who had her hair combed into 2 buns to show him why flowers were so red. Finally, he had to face threats from abroad and be on guard against assassinations. He hadn't left the palace for a few days. Sigh. Renbaqian sighed deeply. When would these days come to an end? He lay on the bed for a long time before getting up. There were many missed calls on his phone. Among them, Chunqing alone had called 10 times. There were also some who he didn't know. Renbaqian thought for a while, and felt that there shouldn't be anything going on recently. The last time he came back, the verdict was that it was justified self-defense. After all, he was a law-abiding citizen, and the evidence at the scene had proven everything. Even the jade pendants and some other things had been retrieved. Why was Chunqing looking for him? After thinking for a while, Renbaqian decided to call Chunqing. Brother, you are my brother. Can you watch the time before calling next time? Chunqing was full of resentment. Renbaqian chuckled. I have been so miserable these days, but I only harassed you once. I see that you have made a few calls. What's the matter? Renbaqian asked. There's good news. There's progress in the earworm research. However, let's talk about the details tomorrow. Chunqing hung up immediately after he finished speaking. When Renbaqian called again, the other party's phone was turned off. He then threw the phone aside. If he waited for the laboratory to conduct the research, his bones would have turned into ashes by now. However, there were still benefits. After all, there was a result from the research, which meant that the new drug was one step closer to the market. As for the specifics, he still had to see what the results were. This time, he brought back some green vines and seeds. These things would probably come in handy very soon. It was said that these green vines grew very fast. They could grow a lot in a few months and could be used in half a year. Renbaqian had personally experienced the effects of this green vine water. It could crush all the hangover medicines on the market. As long as this thing was marketed, he would soon have a source of income. After lying on the bed in a daze for half a day, Renbachian entered the visualization of water. An hour later, he came out of the visualization of water and immediately fell asleep. When he woke up the next morning, he spaced out for a while before changing his clothes and going downstairs for breakfast. Then he took the ivy to the laboratory. Lucky boy, you actually came. How rare. Su Shan greeted Renbachian as soon as she saw him. She lacked the proper respect for this big boss. The main reason was that Renbachian appeared too infrequently. Furthermore, he wasn't in charge of anything. He was just a big financial backer and a provider of research directions. Is there any progress with the worms? Renbachian asked. Indeed. Follow me. Su Shan brought Renbachian to her office and took out a pile of documents and photos to explain to him. 10 minutes later, Renbachian summarized the content that Su Shan had explained to him for a long time. It was a certain substance in the body of a deep-sea organism that contained the antidote that he brought previously. It could suppress the worms, and with sufficient dosage, it could be said that it could kill the worms. The only problem was that it was harmful to the human body. However, for leukemia patients, this was already a small problem. How long do you need to complete the research and development of the drug? Renbachian asked. 2 years at the earliest, and at least 3 years for it to be on the market. Su Shan gave a rough figure. Renbachian nodded his head and asked, how's the black mud cream? I'm afraid it will take even longer. The growth of some medicinal herbs is too slow, Su Shan replied. I brought some good stuff for you. Renbachian pushed the bag over. Su Shan's eyes lit up when she heard this. One had to know that the first 2 items that Renbachian brought were new things that no one had discovered before. She didn't expect him to bring out something new again. You have already become a legend in my heart. I really want to know, where did you get so many good things from? Su Shan couldn't help but say. She took out the ivy from the bag without any delay. It was as thick as 2 fingers. Although it had been plucked for some time, it was preserved very well. Its entire body was emerald green, and only the edges were a little withered. What's this? Su Shan took the ivy and examined it. She couldn't help but ask. It's called ivy. When this thing is ground into powder, it can cure a hangover. It's better than all the hangover medicines in the market. Su Shan was slightly disappointed after Renbachian finished speaking. This wasn't what she wanted. Don't look down on it. Its effect is the same as the black mud cream. It takes effect immediately and is very powerful, Renbachian said. I understand. We will start researching on it as soon as possible. According to what you said, this ivy should have a good effect on protecting the liver. Su Shan nodded her head. The laboratory is already short of manpower. It's best to increase the manpower. I'm not responsible for this. You can report this to the higher-ups. Before Renbachian could finish his sentence, Su Shan had already picked up her phone and called Papa Chen. She had fully displayed her swift and decisive attitude. After the call was connected, she introduced the things that he brought to Renbachian and reiterated that they were severely short of manpower. In less than half an hour, Papa Chen rushed over. After exchanging conventional greetings, he asked, is this ivy very effective? Renbachian repeated what he said earlier. It's very powerful. I have used it personally, and the effect is immediate. Papa Chen immediately laughed. After listening to Renbachian's words, he could instantly imagine the prospects of this ivy. Even though there were many types of hangover medicine nowadays, most of them had the function of protecting the liver. After drinking it, the effect wasn't that great. However, banquets were indispensable. For a person like him who often had to socialize, he had already suffered a lot. In modern society, there were many people who needed to socialize frequently. Therefore, even though the effect wasn't that great, the market for hangover medicine was still pretty good. If it was as Renbachian said, the medicine made from this ivy would immediately seize the entire market when it was put on the market. When the time comes, let's re-sign the contract. This time you have to agree to it. Papa Chen reiterated his previous idea. After all, everything in the laboratory was provided by Renbachian. Moreover, there were 3 of them. Even though Papa Chen had invested some energy and funds, it was still far from the shares that he currently held. If he didn't want any problems to arise in future collaborations, he had to make things clear. After all, the first time Rinpochian produced the black mud cream, it could be attributed to luck. However, the second and third time couldn't be attributed to luck. If he knew his position, he would be able to reap more benefits in the future. There were gains and losses. He understood this point very well. We'll talk about it when the time comes. Rinpochian didn't seem to care. Seeing him like this, Papachan could tell that he was really not interested. He didn't say anything else. Next time, he would just prepare the contract for him to sign. At the same time, he was also very curious about what Rinpochian was doing now. After all, he didn't care about money. He also didn't care about managing the laboratory and the pharmaceutical factory. What did he care about? After Rinpochian bade farewell to Papachan and left the laboratory, he immediately made a call and went to an office building located a few streets away. There was already a middle-aged man waiting for him downstairs. After greeting him, Rinpochian followed the other party to the 6th floor. There was an area of about 300 square meters for rent. This is the place. It used to be a software company. However, they expanded and moved to a bigger place. The bespectacled middle-aged man introduced the place to Rinpochian. Did they go bankrupt? Rinpochian casually asked. The middle-aged man immediately cried out. How is that possible? The feng shui here is excellent. Back then, we specially got someone to check it out. Rinpochian looked at him sideways. The other party's reaction made him even more suspicious. You can find out by just asking around, Rinpochian said. The other party immediately felt a chill in his heart. This young man wasn't easy to fool. He immediately shut up and stopped complaining. Forget it. Anyway, I don't care about what happened to the previous company. Rinpochian told the truth. He was prepared to hire some programmers to create a software that could convert Chinese characters into the language of the other world. When the time comes, he could directly convert the books he wanted into the language of the other world. He was prepared to throw money into this company, not to make money. The laboratory and pharmaceutical factory that he worked with Papachan were enough to make money. The market for hangover medicine alone was worth 500 million yuan a year. Furthermore, it was the same type of hangover medicine that protected the liver. When the hangover medicine made from green vines hit the market, with its powerful effects, not only would it occupy the entire market, but it would also expand the market by several times. It could even be sold overseas. At that time, the market for hangover medicine alone would be more than 1 billion yuan. It could even reach 2 to 3 billion yuan. Together with the other two medicines, the market would be worth at least several billion yuan every year. Furthermore, these medicines would immediately occupy the entire market after they were launched. Therefore, he had no qualms about setting up a company that only spent money and did not make money. 330 square meters, 16,000 yuan a month. Rinpochian immediately signed a 3-year contract with the other party and transferred a year's rent to them. After settling this matter, he went to look for the company that rented the house previously. It was almost time, and he was prepared to buy the house this time. 2 days later, the owner of the house became Rinpochian. He could be considered to have his own house in this city, even though it was no longer important to him. However, on this bright and beautiful morning, the image of the Empress sitting on the sofa, eating ice cream and watching television while he made breakfast in the kitchen would forever remain in his memory. Before returning to the other world, Rinpochian still felt a little regretful. Actually, he was prepared to sign up for a mixed martial arts class. He felt that it would be the fastest way to increase his combat power in a short period of time. At least, he would not be trampled on by a little Lolita every day. However, these days he was busy handling the transfer of the house. He also had to find a headhunting company to help him find an assistant. Unfortunately, he was not satisfied with a few of them. Chapter 246. When Rinpochian returned to the other world, he suddenly felt that he had forgotten something. He frowned and pondered for a long time. What exactly did he forget? The next moment he knelt down. Where's the Eru? Where's the Eru? Where's the Eru? Rinpochian was dumbfounded. How could he forget the Eru again? Why did he forget the Eru every time he returned to Earth? Could it be that he was born with a bad temper? The heavens are not blessing me. Renbachian raised his head and sighed bitterly. It was useless to sigh now. He had to think of a way to explain to the Empress, or how to make the Empress not pursue this matter. Although the Empress couldn't really chop him, she could definitely do something like kneeling to a glass shard. Perhaps he could change the practice from once every 2 days to once every day? Or perhaps the Empress would personally give him a one-sided beating. What should he do? Renbachian paced around the room for a long time, but couldn't think of any good ideas. Could it be that he had to carry a bramble and beg for forgiveness? Put a bunch of brambles on his back? This wasn't Renbachian's style. Furthermore, even if he did that, the Empress would most likely sneer and beat him up with the little Lolita. Renbachian had a pained look on his face. This way, he could only resort to his last resort. Get injured and beg for forgiveness. Knife. Is there anything like a fruit knife? Renbachian searched the room for a long time, but he couldn't find any weapons from Earth. He did find a handgun, a Type 81 rifle, and a grenade. However, these weren't weapons that could be used to get injured and beg for forgiveness. Finally, Renbachian found a short knife in the room. His eyes immediately lit up, followed by a constipated expression. This knife was given to him by the husband of the pregnant woman he saved at the Chen medicine shop, when he taught them how to use the condom to stop bleeding. The problem now was that this knife was too thick. No, it was too wide. Although it was a short knife, it was several times wider than the small knife that Renbachian imagined. It was wide, thick, and had rust on it. Renbachian felt that it would be better to let the Empress beat him up with a knife than to use this thing to stab him. However, after thinking about it, he had already forgotten about it a few times. He couldn't possibly forget about it again, right? He also felt guilty in his heart. Forget it. It was better to suffer an injury and beg for forgiveness. The pain was just a matter of a few moves. With the black mud cream, he would be fine again in less than 2 hours. Men had to be tough on themselves. At the thought of this, Renbachian clenched his teeth, pulled out the dagger, and gestured at his arm for a long time. Then he clenched his teeth and slashed his arm with the dagger. Immediately, a palm-long wound that was half an inch deep appeared, and blood immediately flowed out. Renbachian was in so much pain that he was gritting his teeth and sweating profusely. Looking at the wound on his arm, Renbachian decided that he might as well go all the way. He gestured with the knife at his chest, and then made another cut. Fortunately, the length of this saber is suitable for my hands. If it were a little longer, I would definitely be blinded. Renbachian's forehead was covered in cold sweat, and his entire body was bathed in blood. Ah! Renbachian immediately cried out in pain. His eyes were wide open as he stared at the knife in his hand. Now this was no longer a rusty dagger. It was clearly a long dagger, a full meter long. Just now the knife was clearly only about 30 centimeters long. Just as he was thinking, if it was a little longer, I would be blinded. The knife suddenly became a meter long, and it happened to pierce through his arm. Was this the Rui Jingu saber? Renbachian's eyes were wide open as this thought emerged in his mind, following which he felt a lingering fear. If he had aimed the knife at his chest just now, the Empress would have already collected his corpse, following which he felt a sharp pain in his arm. Damn it! Renbachian clenched his teeth and endured the pain as he pulled out the knife. Blood immediately spurted out. Renbachian looked at the knife in his hand. After 1 second, he decided to hide the knife first and look for the Empress to save his life. He could study this knife later on. After stuffing the knife under the mattress, Renbachian's lips trembled as he picked up the walkie-talkie and called the Empress. 10 seconds passed, 20 seconds passed, 1 minute passed. Renbachian looked at the sky. It was daytime. Why wasn't the Empress's walkie-talkie by her side? I won't die from excessive blood loss, right? When Renbachian thought of this, he trembled even more. He hurriedly pushed open the door and ran out to look for the Imperial Guards for help. Seeing Deputy Prefect Ren running out to ask for help with his body covered in blood, the Imperial Guards were scared stiff. Everyone knew how much the Empress doted on him. If anything were to happen to him, the consequences would be unimaginable. Your Majesty, I don't know how Deputy Prefect Ren got injured all over his body. I have already asked the doctor to send someone to treat him. In a large hall, the Empress was soaking in a clear pool with her eyes gently closed. At this moment, Hong Wuan's voice came from the door. The Empress suddenly opened her eyes. According to the time, Ren Baqian should have just returned from Earth, right? Did something happen? In the next moment, her spotlessly white body appeared at the side of the pool. Her white inner garment was like a cloud that enveloped her in the air. Following which, she put on a muslin garment and completely disappeared from the hall. Hong Wuan looked at the disappearing figure in the hall and sighed. Her Majesty was a little too concerned about that person. Before that person, when had Her Majesty ever been like this? When the Empress arrived at Pingle Park, the doctor from the clinic had yet to arrive. The Imperial Guards were using a white cloth to clean Rinpochian's wounds. What happened? The Empress frowned and asked. Her entire body was filled with killing intent. Your Majesty, this is a long story. Let's talk about it later when it's convenient. Rinpochian's face was pale and his forehead was full of sweat. Now his wounds were even more painful than before, causing him to shiver. Not long after, the doctor from the clinic came and examined Rinpochian's wounds. The wounds on his chest and arms weren't considered serious. They merely looked scary. However, the wound that went through his chest only injured a little bone. After the doctor treated Rinpochian's wounds and applied the black mud cream to bandage them, he bade farewell and left. After the Imperial Guards left, Rinpochian spoke while shivering. Previously it was painful. This time it was even more painful and itchy. After all, even though the black mud cream healed wounds quickly, the numbness and itchiness caused by the rapid healing of the wounds was also very fatal. Your Majesty, I was just about to go buy some things after settling some matters. Suddenly, two people appeared and slashed at me with knives. These two people were not like ordinary people. Even though I resisted with all my might, I was still not their match and was injured in a few places. Seeing that the situation was not good, I quickly came back, Rinpochian said. The Empress frowned and said, find out who did it. I will exterminate his entire family. Thank you, Your Majesty. However, I don't know who I have offended. I will have to investigate carefully when I return, Rinpochian quickly said. I didn't expect such a thing to happen in your world, the Empress said. Where there are people, there will be underworld. Where there is underworld, there will be disputes. Sometimes you don't even know who you have offended, but the other party will bear a grudge and even attack you. It has been like this since ancient times and has never been severed. Rinpochian's face was filled with vicissitudes of life. The Empress deeply agreed with the saying, where there are people, there will be underworld. Where there is underworld, there will be disputes. Currently, Great Xia views you as a thorn in their side. In your world, there are also people who want to make a move on you. It's better for you to practice martial arts properly these few days. I will supervise you. You need to increase your daily practice time by 2 hours, the Empress said after thinking about it. Chapter 247. Your Majesty, I'm still injured. Rinpochian was at a loss. He was still thinking about the knife under the mattress. My wounds have healed. At most, I'll just lose some blood. Or do you want me to spar with you personally? The Empress was so angry that she had a headache. He had never seen someone who disliked martial arts so much. And Dayo, who wouldn't work hard when given such an opportunity. At this moment, there was still a faint scar left on Rinpochian's wound. The effects of the black mud cream could be said to be miraculous. It was just that the wounds were so painful that they made people want to die. Just like that, Rinpochian's 6 hours a day of martial arts practice became 8 hours a day of martial arts practice. Rinpochian felt that he had succeeded in courting death. If he had known earlier, he would have let the Empress do a double team. Rinpochian dragged his exhausted body as if he had just been ravaged by someone. He returned to his room, closed the door and windows, and took out the knife from under the mattress. For the entire day, his mind was filled with the Rui Jingu saber. It could be long or short, and he did not know if it could be big or small. Did I come across a treasure? Rinpochian had this thought in his mind for the whole day. Once he returned, he hurriedly checked it out. Renbachian felt that he knew very little about this world. For example, the weapons used by the Aboriginal warriors were all made of ordinary fine iron. He had never heard of any heaven-grade weapons. It just so happened that there was a spirit sword in this world, something that even Newton and Darwin's coffins could not contain. The people in this world knew very little about spiritual swords. Even those sword masters didn't know much about them. At least, this was what Ning Kaichen said. It gave Renbachian the feeling that there were still many unknown things in this world. Even the Empress didn't know much about these things. As a result, even though he was shocked by the Rui Jingu saber, he didn't find it hard to accept. Instead, he wanted to know what kind of treasure it was. At this point in time, the saber in Renbachian's hand had reverted to its original form of a short saber. It was no longer more than a foot long. What happened in the morning seemed like an illusion. Renbachian held the hilt of the saber in his hand and pointed it upwards. Long grow longer. Big grow bigger. Renbachian struggled for a long time, but the dagger in his hand did not react at all. If it wasn't for the knife that pierced his arm in the morning, he would have thought that it was an illusion. Thinking about it, the only difference between this time and this morning was that there was blood in the morning, but now there was none. Could it be that this thing could recognize its owner with blood? But he had dripped blood in the morning. Renbachian thought about it, and felt that this was the only possibility. He wasn't willing to give it a try. He clenched his teeth and cut his arm again. Then, he allowed the fresh blood from his arm to drip onto the blade of the saber, while he carefully observed the changes in the saber. Grow longer. With a thought from Renbachian, the blade suddenly elongated from 1 foot to 2 feet. Moreover, the appearance of the saber had also changed a little. The originally somewhat blunt front end had become sharper. Grow longer. Renbachian continued to mutter. In the morning, the saber was 1 meter long, which was 3 feet long. Now it was still 1 foot short. As the fresh blood continued to drip onto the blade, the Rui Jingu saber grew another 10 centimeters after much effort. The blood that had flowed onto the saber did not spill out at all. Instead, it began to fade and eventually disappeared into the saber, as if it had been absorbed by the saber. This thing doesn't recognize its owner by dripping blood. Does it suck blood? Renbachian suddenly realized this problem. Moreover, it seems like the more blood it sucks, the longer it grows? Or does it change according to its will? Widen. Grow bigger. Renbachian experimented for a long time, and finally confirmed that the saber had indeed grown longer, but its width and thickness remained the same. Renbachian frowned. He first wiped his wound with a cloth and applied the black mud cream. This was the leftover from the morning that the doctor didn't take away. He had already lost a lot of blood in the morning. If he continued to bleed, he reckoned that he would really die from excessive blood loss. After treating the wound, Renbachian held the saber and muttered, "Grow." The saber changed back to its original shape. Grow. This time the saber still grew longer, but it was only half a meter long. It seems that the blood that this thing sucks will be consumed, or rather, it will decrease over time. Therefore, when I came back and tried to make the saber change, there was no reaction. This is considered a good thing, right? Renbachian held the hilt of the saber and sized it up carefully. Just from its appearance, this saber didn't look outstanding. However, just from the fact that it could grow and shrink, one could tell that it wasn't an ordinary item. This isn't a spirit sword, right? Renbachian thought about Ning Saichen's spirit sword and what he said. It shouldn't be. The spirit sword had its own sword spirit, and when wielding the spirit sword, it could greatly increase the strength of the sword master, although the price was the consumption of the sword master's life force. However, this knife did not react at all when he held it. Instead, it sucked blood and grew shorter and longer. This did not match Ning Saichen's description of the spiritual sword. From the looks of it, it was another kind of treasure. In any case, this saber should be considered a good thing. Renbachian's first thought was to give it to the Empress. After thinking about it carefully, he could only give it to the Empress. Otherwise, it wouldn't be of much use in his hands unless he sent it to the laboratory. However, he really didn't dare to send this kind of thing to the laboratory. Something big would definitely happen. At the thought of this, Renbaqian felt somewhat happy. After all, he still didn't know how much he admired the Empress in his heart. Was it 60%, 70%, 80%, 90%, or even 10%? However, he was sure that he liked her very much, and that she was extremely important to him. Renbaqian didn't feel reluctant to give this treasure to her. Instead, he was very happy. However, just as he stood up, he hesitated and felt that it would be better to wait for a few days. If he gave it to her now, his previous injuries might be exposed. Just like that, 3 days later, Renbaqian took the short saber to Yangxin Palace Hall. "Your Majesty, I found a treasure." "Oh." The Empress straightened her body and was slightly curious. Renbaqian had been in the palace for the past few days. How could he obtain a treasure? This short saber. Renbaqian looked like he was presenting a treasure. He handed the short saber to the Empress, and was prepared to keep her in suspense. In a while he would show the Empress how long this saber could grow and shrink. The Empress took the short saber from Renbaqian's hand. It was wrapped in an ordinary leather scabbard, and the handle was also wrapped in a layer of animal skin. It didn't look precious at all. Renbaqian casually took the short saber out of the scabbard. It was only about a foot long, slightly thick, and the front was blunt. The body of the saber didn't look sharp, and even had a few rice grain-sized nicks. Renbaqian had a proud look on his face. This saber definitely didn't look any different from the outside. It was just an ordinary, slightly worn-out short saber. He had it for so long. If he hadn't been injured that day, he wouldn't have discovered it. The Empress initially thought that Renbaqian had really found a treasure. However, upon closer inspection, it was indeed an ordinary short saber. She couldn't help but raise her head and look at Renbaqian. "Your Majesty, this short saber is indeed a treasure. Previously, I taught a set of hemostasis techniques at the Chun family's medicine shop, and saved a pregnant woman. The pregnant woman's husband gave this saber to me as a token of gratitude. At first, I thought it was just an ordinary short saber. I didn't expect to find out that there was a secret hidden within it this morning." Renbaqian told the Empress about the origin of this saber, as if he was narrating a story. As the Empress listened, she caressed the body of the saber and flicked it with her finger. Clang, clang. Renbaqian's eyes widened all of a sudden. His mouth, which was originally talking incessantly, couldn't even utter a single word. It broke. It broke. It actually broke. He saw that with that flick of the Empress's finger, the body of the saber immediately became shorter. The tip of the saber drew an arc and fell to the ground. The Empress looked at the broken edge of the saber. It wasn't hollow, and there wasn't anything hidden inside. She raised her head and looked at him doubtfully. Chapter 248. Renbaqian held the broken saber in one hand, and the tip of the saber in the other. He cursed inwardly. What happened to this precious saber? It broke with a flick of the saber? It was broken by the Empress's saber at a spot 5 centimeters inwards. Could it be glued with all-purpose glue? Or should it be melted down and reforged? What's the secret? The Empress looked curious. She sprinkled salt and cumin on the wound in Renbaqian's heart. "Your Majesty, this was originally a precious saber. Now it's broken." Renbaqian's heart ached. "A precious saber? I couldn't tell." The Empress replied noncommittally. "Sigh." Renbaqian sighed. His mind was filled with thoughts on how to reattach the saber, and whether it could still be used. He said helplessly, "I accidentally discovered that this saber can change its length with my thoughts after being stained with blood. I thought it was a treasure, and came to gift it to your Majesty. I didn't expect it to break." Change its length? The Empress found Renbaqian's words strange, but she didn't find anything special about this saber. "At least it can change its length, but I don't know if it can still be used." Renbaqian pondered and cut his arm with the saber. Blood flowed directly onto the saber. The first time he cut himself, he was still afraid of pain and clenched his teeth for a long time. The second and third time he cut himself, even though he was still afraid of pain, he didn't hesitate anymore. Now that he had cut himself, Renbaqian felt that it didn't matter anymore. He didn't show any mercy and didn't even frown. He didn't even realize that he had awakened some strange attribute. The Empress frowned slightly when she saw Renbaqian's actions. She then focused on the saber in his hand. Grow, grow, grow. Following Renbaqian's thoughts, the saber gradually elongated in the Empress's eyes, from less than 1 foot to 2 feet long. The Empress exclaimed softly. It was actually true. However, even though the saber was elongated, the front end was still broken. Renbaqian held the broken saber, and thought that since it could change its length, it definitely wasn't an ordinary saber. Now that there was still blood on it, he wanted to see if the tip of the saber could reattach itself. If it was an ordinary saber, it definitely wouldn't work. However, Renbaqian still had some expectations for this saber. Renbaqian connected the blades together. As the blood was gradually absorbed by the blade, the crack at the joint gradually shrank until it was as thick as a strand of hair. Although there was still a crack, when he released one of his hands, the entire blade was connected together and didn't fall off. Success. Renbaqian was overjoyed at the unexpected good news. He thought that this treasured saber would die before it could be used. Unexpectedly, it could be retrieved by itself. It was indeed a treasured saber. Renbaqian hurriedly sprinkled some more blood on the saber. The hair-thin crack gradually faded and finally disappeared. The saber became the same as before, but the gap on the blade was still there. Your Majesty, it's indeed a treasured saber. You actually managed to retrieve it. Renbaqian happily handed the saber to the Empress with both hands. At this moment, the Empress was also somewhat interested. She took the saber and examined it carefully. At this moment, the saber was 2.5 feet long. The original rust on it had also disappeared. There was a cold gleam on the blade. The only flaw was that there were a few rice grain-sized gaps on the blade. Just now, she personally saw the saber grow from 1 foot to 2.5 feet. She also personally saw the tip of the saber being reattached. Naturally, she knew that this saber was indeed not an ordinary saber. She tapped the tip of the saber on her fingertip. A white dot appeared on her fingertip. Then she used the saber to cut her palm. A white line appeared on her palm and disappeared in a flash. Your Majesty. Renbaqian was first shocked by the Empress's actions. Soon after, he was speechless. Even though this saber couldn't cut through iron like mud, it couldn't be considered blunt either. When he cut his body, his flesh was split open. Yet, when it cut the Empress's skin, it actually only left a white line. It couldn't even penetrate her defense. He grabbed the Empress's wrist and felt the temperature of her palm. Her skin was exquisite and smooth. It seemed to be no different from that of an ordinary girl. At most, her skin was a little better. It was really hard to imagine that the Empress's skin could actually only leave a white line after being cut by a saber. She was so powerful that she simply didn't seem like a human. The Empress used her strength to cut her palm again. However, the white line only lasted for a little longer. After that, it slowly returned to its original state. 2 fair fingers cut the saber's body. Pa! A soft sound was heard. Clang! More than half of the saber's body fell to the ground. Renbaqian. Treasure saber, you died so miserably. Its sharpness and hardness are ordinary. Other than being able to lengthen and shorten, it's no different from an ordinary saber. Keep it for fun, the Empress said indifferently. Even though it was somewhat novel, the Empress lost interest in this saber after trying it out. Renbaqian looked at the saber that had fallen to the ground, and was somewhat speechless. Treasure saber, you are really too disappointing. You broke it with just a touch. Are you here to extort money? To think that he thought that he had obtained a treasure previously. At present, it could indeed be considered a treasure. However, other than using it for fun, it didn't seem to have much use. If this saber was used as a weapon, it wouldn't immediately break after a single slash. Renbaqian picked up the saber. He thought that since the Empress didn't want it, he would bring it back to Earth to study it. He wanted to know what exactly was going on with this saber. Your Majesty, do you want to play a game? Renbaqian suggested excitedly when he saw that the Empress was bored to death in the palace. What is it? The Empress asked casually. She wasn't too interested in it. KF. Renbaqian took out the bag that contained the laptop previously. There were 2 game controllers inside. He had prepared these the previous time as he thought that if the Empress was bored in the palace, she could also play some games. Your Majesty, this should be done like this, like this, like this. Rinpoche sat side by side with the Empress and taught her how to operate the game controllers. Seeing the small figure that appeared on the laptop screen, the Empress finally became a little more energetic and began to focus her attention. 1 hour later. Perfect. A sound was emitted from the laptop. Pa. The game controller in the Empress's hand turned into a pile of fragments and fell to the ground. Boring. The Empress's pretty face was almost raised to the sky with a look of disdain. As she loosened her grip, all the fragments in her hand fell to the ground. Rinpoche didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Your Majesty, aren't you too much of a sore loser? The last time they played checkers, she smashed the checkers into powder with 1 slap. This time, she also smashed the game controller into pieces. Next time it would be better to play Contra. He didn't know if the character would directly smash the laptop into pieces after death. Looking at the Empress's past 2 times, it wasn't impossible. It was full of dark history. Fortunately, the Empress didn't smash the laptop this time. Both of them could still watch a movie. After lunch, it was time for Rinpoche to practice martial arts. Just as he was about to pack his things, his gaze fell on the treasure saber that he had just broken. Suddenly, he discovered something that made him dumbfounded. The end of that short saber was only about 10 centimeters long, and was slightly shorter than before. And the part that was broken was still the same length as when it was first broken. It was about a foot long. Your Majesty, look. Rinpoche was shocked as he picked up the broken saber. For a moment, his mind was filled with a magical melody. I have a beautiful wish when I grow up. I can sew the sun so 1 by 1 is enough will bear many, many suns, 1 for the South Pole, 1 for the Arctic Ocean, 1 to hang in the winter, 1 to hang at night, la la la. Plant the sun, la 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 la. Plant the sun, la 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 la. Plant the sun. The magical melody kept reverberating in Rinpoche's mind. All he had to do was to replace the word sun with treasure saber. If the broken part wouldn't shorten, would he be able to grow this saber by watering it with blood? As long as he watered it with blood, it would lengthen and then be cut off. Rinpoche was shocked. This was simply a magical weapon. Why would he still need to mine iron? He just had to plant the saber. Chapter 249. After a day of training, Rinpoche dragged his exhausted body back to Pingle Park with his treasure saber. I should give you a name. Rinpoche pondered for a while. Ruijingu saber? Should I call it longevity saber? Rinpoche grinned. This name wasn't bad. It could grow and change. Let's call it the elongation saber. Rinpoche felt that he needed a physics laboratory. This knife definitely couldn't be sent to a pharmaceutical laboratory. It was a pity that he had no money now. He could forget about the physics laboratory. It was not something that he could build with just 20 million yuan. Even if he could, he was not prepared to spend all his money. For the time being, he only needed to know how to use the knife. When he had the money, he would consider researching the knife. The next morning, Rinpoche excitedly went to the imperial kitchen to look for caretaker Go. Then he went to the lower hall. The imperial kitchen was divided into 2 parts. The first part was the upper hall, where the Empress usually ate. Now his meals were also prepared here. The other part was the lower hall, which was responsible for the meals of the maids, female officials and guards. Every day, the palace needed to slaughter the livestock there. When they arrived, they saw 2 giant goats, a wild boar, and a scimitar-horned cow ready to be slaughtered. In this world, the wild boar was called a black-faced gentleman, while the scimitar-horned cow was similar to a water buffalo. It was smaller than the fork-horned cow, and wasn't as good at running as the fork-horned cow. Use this knife to kill. Rinpoche passed the broken knife to the person who was preparing to kill the livestock. The other party had a look of, "Are you kidding me?" This saber didn't even have a sharp point, and it was so short. In the end, Rinpoche used a knife that was specially used for slaughtering livestock, and soaked the broken knife in a basin of blood. The blood of the 4 animals was sucked clean by it in 2 hours, causing the surrounding people to be shocked. In the past, the blood of a single animal could fill a large basin, but now it was all gone. Renbachian did not explain anything. He carried the saber and returned to Pingle Park. As he thought, grow, grow, grow. The saber grew from half a foot to 6 feet, which was 2 meters long. Renbachian held the long saber and pointed it upwards. Suddenly, he felt that he was like Sephiroth, only lacking a head of elegant long hair and a leather windbreaker. Needless to say, this saber looked a bit thick when it was a short saber, but when it became a long saber, it looked a bit like a Zamadeo. However, Renbachian also discovered a problem this time. This saber had absorbed the blood of 4 animals, and its length wasn't satisfactory. One had to know that the blood he spilled back then had caused it to grow 3 feet long. However, if he released all the blood from the 4 animals, he would only be able to absorb 6 feet of blood. If that was the case, the effect wouldn't be as great as he thought. Could it be that only human blood was effective? Could it be that only his blood was effective? At the thought of this, Renbachian was shocked. After thinking about it carefully, this saber was indeed of little use. After slaughtering 4 animals in the palace every day, it was only 6 feet long. At the very least, he had to keep 1 foot of it for future use. As for a 5 feet long saber, Renbachian weighed it in his hand and found that it weighed about 5 caddies. Over 1,500 caddies of iron a year was better than nothing. Unless they were sent to a slaughterhouse, but there were no slaughterhouses in this world. They were all slaughtered privately. Were they going to build a processing plant outside the city? If he really wanted to unleash the power of the longevity saber, this was the only way. Another question was that if the saber was not broken, it would shorten after a period of time. He did not know the reason. Was it really because the blood absorbed by the saber disappeared with the passage of time? Or did it actually increase other aspects of the blade? For example, hardness. Renbachian felt that he could give it a try. After shortening the saber, it became half a foot long again. Its weight was also reduced. It was about the same weight as when the saber was broken. It was simply amazing. It did not conform to the law of conservation of mass at all. However, the saber seemed to be slightly longer than before it absorbed the blood. Renbachian used his fingers to measure it. It seemed that it was indeed longer by about 1 centimeter. It seemed that as the saber absorbed the blood, it could grow back even if it was not reattached. However, he did not know if it would suffer from kidney deficiency if it kept growing, and then continuously being broken. After experimenting for a while, Renbachian carefully put the saber away and received news that the bricks were ready. Her Majesty summoned him to Yangxin Palace Hall. When Renbachian arrived at Yangxin Palace Hall, there were already 2 people standing there. One was Tang Zhinya, and the other was someone he had never seen before. He only found out later that he was a junior minister from the Department of Works. Bricks and cement were initially handled by the Department of Ordnance. After all, Jingtian furnaces were also managed by the Department of Ordnance. Now the firing of cement and clay bricks was transferred to the Department of Works. In front of Tang Zhinya, there were a few pieces of street fighting equipment. Bricks. Deputy Prefect Ren, do you think this is the right one? Tang Zhinya asked after Renbachian greeted him. Renbachian raised his head and looked at the Empress before looking at the bricks with a face full of joy. They felt good to the touch, had a smooth surface, and were very heavy. They weren't as rough as modern red bricks. This was because coal ash wasn't added into the bricks. Even though firing them this way was more troublesome, the quality was the best and wouldn't deteriorate after hundreds of years. After smashing the bricks into pieces, they saw that the interior was very dense, unlike the black interior of the red bricks that had coal ash added. After Renbachian examined them carefully, he laughed and said, "That's it. This method of firing bricks and building with cement is much easier than mining and polishing rocks." The others nodded their heads. This was indeed the case. "Let's do it this way then. The Ministry of Works will seize the time to fire these bricks and cement to build the glass factory. If there's anything you don't understand, look for Deputy Prefect Ren." The Empress nodded her head. Everyone obeyed the order. Renbachian returned to Pingle Park again, took out the blueprint of the earthen kiln, and handed it to Tang Zhinya. The current earthen kiln firing speed was too slow and there were too few of them. If Dayo didn't completely rely on wood to fire, Renbachian would have preferred to build a rotary kiln. This way, the speed of firing bricks and cement would be greatly increased. It's best to place the earthen kiln a little further away. It's a good place to get the clay from, Renbachian exhorted. Why? Tang Zhenye asked curiously. Transporting clay was much easier than transporting bricks. In that case, most of the craftsmen would have to live there. The transportation of food and other supplies would also require more manpower. In that case, the consumption of supplies and manpower would be much higher. Otherwise, after a few years, when a large amount of burnt debris floats in the air, you won't even be able to see the stars when you look up. Renbachian spread his hands and said. He was just short of saying that it was everyone's responsibility to protect the environment and leave a piece of azure sky for future generations. He didn't want to wake up every day in the next 10 or 20 years to be surrounded by a haze like a fairyland. However, it was still very difficult for Tang Zhenye to understand. After all, the people in this world had never seen what was called air pollution. Do as Deputy Prefect Ren said. The Empress said decisively. In this aspect, Renbachian was much more knowledgeable than them. Only then did Tang Zhenye nod his head in agreement. Following which, Tang Zhenye looked at Renbachian with an extremely strange gaze, which made Renbachian's hair stand on end. What's wrong? Renbachian didn't understand. I heard a little about Deputy Prefect Ren from Tonglan. Deputy Prefect Ren's shamelessness is similar to my demeanor in the past. Tang Zhenye stroked his beard with a look of admiration on his face. However, even a fool could see that his eyes were filled with contempt. A few days ago, Her Majesty summoned Tonglan to the palace as a sparring partner. Tang Zhenye didn't think much of it. Even though Tonglan was young, it wasn't a problem for her to fight 3 to 5 Renbachian with one hand. However, when he was having a meal at the Tong residence, he casually asked about it. After hearing about what happened in the afternoon, he immediately spurted out his food. Not to mention him, even the rest of the people in the Tong residence were shocked. How could he be so shameless in front of the Empress and a 10-year-old child? Not only did he dare to mention brothels, he even threatened them with words like not returning the money. This was simply an eye-opener. Chapter 250. I'll go back with you. I've said before that I'll exterminate the entire family of those who attacked you previously. The Empress said to Renbachian with an indifferent look on her face. Renbachian's heart skipped a beat. The last time he came back, he was covered in blood and asked for forgiveness. He said that he was attacked on the road. In the past, he seemed to have told the Empress that he could only teleport to a fixed location. Furthermore, the few times he teleported with the Empress proved that this was true. As long as he brought the Empress back to Earth, he was afraid that he would immediately be exposed. Your Majesty, when I return this time, I want to find out who the mastermind is. It will be very boring. I can't let Your Majesty accompany me to search for clues. Why don't you go with me after I find out who it is, Your Majesty? Renbachian didn't panic at all as he smiled and spoke softly. What should we do if we encounter danger this time? With your skills, you can't even defeat a child. The Empress looked at him and asked. There was a tinge of concern in her voice as she conveniently stabbed a knife into Renbachian's heart. I will be careful when I return this time. Moreover, I have to go through tempering. A flower in a greenhouse cannot withstand the wind and rain. The strength of ordinary people on Earth is worlds apart from that of the aboriginals. If I can't deal with them, then I'm really useless, Renbachian explained. Besides, I still have a gun. I didn't bring it with me last time, but I won't forget this time. As for the spear, the Empress was non-committal. It was like a toy to her. However, it did have a certain effect on ordinary people. Since you insist, we'll do as you say. Be careful. The Empress said with a hint of concern. Zixiao, I will be careful. After 2.5 days, I will be able to come back at any time. There won't be any danger. Renbachian nodded with a gentle smile. In the palace, he rarely called the Empress by her name. At this moment, directly calling her by her name seemed rather intimate. After returning to Pingle Park, Renbachian heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, she didn't insist. Otherwise, something big would have happened. However, even though she didn't insist, he felt guilty when he thought about how she treated him. This caused a guilty look to appear on his face. It was better not to lie to her next time. Getting injured and asking for forgiveness once was enough. If you walk too much at night, you will inevitably run into ghosts, and a general will inevitably die in battle. He remembered that he used to be a famous, honest, and cute young man, but now it seemed that lying had almost become an instinct. Sigh life. Renbachian sighed slightly and took out the pistol from the house. He was lying to the Empress and there wasn't any danger. Naturally, there was no need for him to bring a pistol with him. On Earth, having a pistol in one's hand would be troublesome. He changed his clothes and looked at the gun on the bed. In the end, he stuffed it into his waist pocket. The next moment, he disappeared. That kid is really hard to find. Let's wait a little longer. If he still doesn't come back, I'll... Renbachian heard this voice as soon as he returned to Earth. Looking in the direction of the voice, he saw a tall and skinny man with glasses sitting on the sofa. Apart from him, there were two other men standing beside him, all of them exuding a tough aura. At this moment, the three of them were staring at Renbachian. It was obvious that they were stunned by his sudden appearance. Renbachian was also dumbfounded. He looked around and realized that this was his house. But where did these three people come from? F***CK, could it be such a coincidence? Something big had happened. Hee, I didn't expect it. I really didn't expect it. It really surprised me. After the man sitting on the sofa calmed down, he immediately clapped and laughed. He let out a series of sighs and his face was filled with a mixture of shock and surprise. Want to chat for a while? That man stretched out his hand and made a gesture. Even though he sounded like he was asking, he didn't have the slightest intention of asking. Renbachian's mind was filled with questions. He also wanted to know who these people were, and what they were here for. However, there was one thing he was sure of, something big had really happened. Renbachian calmed himself down, restrained the shocked expression on his face, and put on a tranquil look. How do I address you? Renbachian stood at the same spot without moving. The two men immediately stretched out their hands to grab Renbachian's shoulders. Renbachian's body moved in an instant. He shifted his elbow upwards and stamped his right foot on the other man's foot. Following which, he lifted his crotch with a kick. That man didn't even have the chance to groan before he fell to the ground while holding onto his crotch. Upon seeing this, the other man glared at Renbachian. Renbachian's figure shifted to the side. Following which, he used the matchless vanguard and used both of his hands to smash his opponent's chest. His opponent immediately flew backward and smashed the coffee table into pieces. Renbachian had made some progress in his martial arts training these days. In addition, his strength had also increased a lot. Now he could already weigh 220 kilograms. His speed was also slightly faster than an ordinary person, so he could easily take down these two men. Your skills are not bad. The bespectacled middle-aged man wasn't the slightest bit surprised by the change in the situation. Instead, he applauded and praised Renbachian. He then added, "But you better behave now. I don't really like people touching me. Now we can chat." Renbachian leaned against the wall and asked, "Who are you?" "Who I am isn't important, but there's no harm in telling you. My name is Jin as in gold, and Jun as in gentleman," Jun said fearlessly. "What are you doing here?" "Originally, it was because of some other matters." Jun picked up a stack of white paper that was scattered on the ground after the coffee table was smashed. "I'm very interested in the shares that you have in this laboratory. Although I don't know how you did it, you actually made Chen Yan withdraw his business in other areas to invest in this laboratory. You are actually the biggest shareholder." Jun put the stack of paper aside. "What do you know?" Renbachian frowned. That stack of paper seemed to be the contract between him and Papa Chen. It was previously placed in the bedroom, but it seemed like they had dug it out. He wasn't surprised that he was exposed. The shareholders of the laboratory could be checked through the Industrial and Commercial Bureau. Although it was a little difficult for ordinary people, it was easy for those with some status and connections. However, he didn't expect that before there were any results from the laboratory, someone would target him directly. Was this person crazy? Did he think that he was overseas and dared to do anything? Why didn't he look for Papa Ma? Or was he just so unscrupulous to this extent? From the current situation, it was very obvious that the other party was so unscrupulous and treated him as a soft persimmon. Of course, in the eyes of outsiders, he was indeed a soft persimmon. A year ago, he was still an ordinary person. He didn't know how he got lucky and cooperated with Papachin. Furthermore, he even owned the majority of the shares. According to what he said, Papachin had withdrawn his business in other areas and focused his attention on the laboratory. This would definitely attract the attention of people with ulterior motives. Then they found him. After all, in their eyes, he was just an ordinary person. Now he only had a piece of paper in his hands and didn't have any influence in society. It was very easy to deal with him. As long as they could take him down, they wouldn't need to pay a huge price to have a stake in the laboratory. After that, they could settle Papachin. If the other party had a grudge against Papachin, they could simply ruin the project that Papachin had invested a lot of money and energy into. Or they could use some methods to distract Papachin's attention and defeat him in other areas. Business has its own way of doing things. The other party's methods were obviously despicable. Renbachian suddenly recalled something. Previously, he was stabbed in the bar. Later on, he heard from Qing that the other party had a business dispute with Papachin. The other party's target was Qing. In the end, he was innocently stabbed. The same despicable method. Could it be this Jin Jun? Or could it be the person behind Jin Jun? Chapter 251. Were you the ones who stabbed me the last time? Renbachian asked curiously. Jin Jun looked at Renbachian carefully. He was very calm and didn't look flustered at all. It seemed that he was confident. Unfortunately, he was confident too. Neither side was in a hurry. You can't talk nonsense like that. We are serious businessmen. Jin Jun smiled faintly. Serious businessmen? Renbachian laughed. It seemed that it was indeed the other party. Furthermore, the other party said we. It seemed that he was representing someone else. Otherwise, he would have said I instead of we. Renbachian, born in 1993, graduated from SY University 2 years ago, lives in Jianxing Garden in T-City, has parents and a younger brother. You see, we know a lot about you, so we're not afraid of you running away or doing something desperate. You can't run away today. Even if you do, you can't run away from the temple. Now let's talk about something I'm interested in. For example, how did you suddenly appear? I'm more interested in this now. Jin Jun spread out his hands. He felt that he had discovered a big secret, which made him a little excited. From Renbachian's past, he was just an ordinary person. Therefore, Jin Jun had nothing to worry about. He didn't even bring any weapons when he came. There was no need and it would cause trouble. What was there to worry about? Would the other party dare to do anything to the three of them? Not to mention his family. Even if he was given a knife, would he dare to kill the three of them? Furthermore, could he kill them? From Renbachian's past, he was as clean and weak as a lamb. But now he had changed his opinion. He didn't know when this kid learned some martial arts. But he wasn't too worried. Would the other party dare to do anything? Renbachian was silent for a while. After hearing what the other party said, his mood immediately turned sour. Although he knew that the other party was a despicable person, no one would be in a good mood when their family was threatened. He looked at the two thugs. One of them was still holding his crotch and rolling on the ground, unable to get up. The other one got up from the ground and looked at him fiercely. People change, Yizichin said. Renbachian sighed. He didn't need to explain the rest of the matter. He only needed to know a few points. First, the other party wasn't just these few people. There might be someone else behind them. Secondly, the other party had actually come for the laboratory that he was collaborating with Papachin. He could be considered unlucky. Upon hearing Renbachian's sigh, Jin Jun felt that something was amiss. Before he could react, Renbachian had already pointed the pistol at him and pulled the trigger. Fortunately, there was a silencer. After a few soft sounds, Jin Jun lay on the sofa with a shocked and puzzled expression. After that, the thug who had a fierce look on his face collapsed with a few bloody holes on his body. Renbachian lowered his head and looked at the man who was immersed in deep pain. Then he extended his leg and stepped on his neck. The Empress always liked to do this, and it seemed very refreshing. Suddenly he wanted to give it a try. He did not expect the other party to grab his calf and try to throw him down. Unfortunately, the other party did not have much strength left. Renbachian felt a little regretful as he shot him in the head. Unlike hitting his body, the back of his head directly exploded. It was very disgusting. Renbachian walked to Jinjun's side, straightened his body and sat down beside him. Jinjun was not dead yet, but he could not say anything. Blood was foaming from his mouth, and his eyes were filled with the fear of death. Surprised, aren't you? Renbachian put his hand on Jinjun's shoulder. He saw that the other thug was still twitching and seemed to be alive. He raised his hand to shoot him again, and the other party immediately stopped moving. Actually, I am more surprised than you, Renbachian said unhurriedly with a sad look on his face. In any case, this is my home. Do you think this is the city gate when you come in and out? Tell me, who did I offend? Nothing good happens every day. It was not easy for me to return home, and I still have to bump into all of you. Don't you think I'm unlucky? Every day this person thinks about me, that person thinks about me, Great Xia thinks about me, and all of you think about me. Renbachian rambled on. Jinjun exhaled his last breath and collapsed weakly on Renbachian's shoulder. Until the moment of his death, he was listening to Renbachian's long-winded nonsense. His heart was filled with despair. Sai, it's not easy to find someone to talk to. Why don't you wait for me to finish? Renbachian turned his head to look at Jinjun, and felt wronged. There weren't many opportunities to talk to people, and there were too many things that he couldn't say. It wasn't easy to find someone to talk to, and Jinjun should have held on a little longer. Sigh. Renbachian sighed deeply and pushed Jinjun aside. What should he do now? It would be easy if it was the last day. He could just clean up the scene and bring the corpses to the other world. However, he had just returned, and there were still 2.5 days left. In less than a day, the other party would probably come looking for him if they couldn't contact Jinjun. Renbachian didn't think that Jinjun's whereabouts weren't known. Therefore, he definitely couldn't leave the corpses here. However, there was a high risk of being discovered if he wanted to bring the 3 corpses downstairs and load them into the car. Only God knew if the other party only had 3 people. What if they left a driver downstairs? If he went downstairs, he would be discovered immediately. When the other party called Jinjun and realized that he couldn't contact the 3 people, he was afraid that something would happen immediately. He might really have to flee for his life this time. How unlucky. Renbachian felt really wronged. Who did he offend? He went upstairs and walked around. Sure enough, the bedroom had been turned upside down. He packed some of his things and was ready to escape at any time. Then he went to the Empress's room. There were many clothes that he bought for the Empress that filled the entire wardrobe. Unfortunately, he couldn't take them away. She wouldn't be unhappy, would she? Forget it, he would just buy more next time. He took out his phone and sent a video call home. His mother picked up after 2 rings. You are getting younger and younger. Renbachian smiled and didn't seem like he was preparing to flee for his life. You are finally willing to call home? When are you coming back? And that girl from last time. Renbachian's mother couldn't forget her. I'm going out for a while when I have time. I will go back after I return. It will be a few hours' journey. I only see you a few times a year. I have almost forgotten that I have a son like you. Renbachian chatted with his mother for 10 minutes before hanging up the phone with some regret. He hoped that he could get through this smoothly. Otherwise, it would be a long time before he could return home. Originally, his younger brother, Renwanyan, had gotten into a good university. His family was going to hold a graduation banquet, and he was preparing to go back. Now it was all ruined. In the end, it was all because of those unlucky people outside. Hello, Chunqing, do you know someone called Jinjun? Renbachian called Chunqing again. Why did you ask about him? Where did you meet him? Did he create trouble for you? Chunqing immediately asked after hearing Renbachian's question. What's his background? Tell me in detail. Following Chen Qing's explanation, Ren Baqian finally knew about Jin Jun's background. Just as Ren Baqian thought, Jin Jun didn't get along with Papa Qin and was considered a business rival. Among them, Jin Wen, Jin Wu, and then Jin Jun were his two elder brothers. Among them, Jin Wen was the leader, followed by Jin Wu. Jin Jun was the last but also the boldest one. The Jin family's influence wasn't small in this city. They were very underhanded and had a group of people under them. The previous bar incident was done by them. However, they rarely let others gossip about them. There were many henchmen who took the blame. Under the protection of these henchmen, Papa Qin couldn't do anything to them. After hearing Chen Qing's words, Ren Baqian said, I have some matters to attend to recently. Help me look after my family, and be careful of the Jin family. How did you become enemies with them? Is there anything I can help you with? Chen Qing immediately asked. Ren Baqian hung up the phone. There was really no one who could help him with his current situation. After walking around the house, he first found some transparent tape and stuck it on the gunshot holes on their bodies. He wanted to see if it could stop the bleeding. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to clean up the bleeding if it kept on bleeding. It was still all right. It was somewhat effective. After wrapping the wounds with a bedsheet, the blood finally stopped flowing out. It was just that the guy who was shot in the back of his head looked like a sakama. It was too disgusting. After pulling the three of them together, Ren Baqian started to mop the floor. However, some blood had seeped into the cracks of the floorboards, so he could only mop the floor. After cleaning up, he looked at the gunshot hole on the floor and regretted shooting too quickly. Now there was a gunshot hole on the floor, and he couldn't clean it up even if he wanted to. He continued to look for pliers and dug out the bullet inside. However, there was a hole in the floorboards. After that, he found 2 more bullet holes on the sofa. Fortunately, the sofa was made of leather. Although it was stained with blood, it was still easy to clean up. If I had known earlier, I would have brought my elongation saber back. The other party is just a bunch of noobs. My 40-meter-long saber will give them a head start of 39 meters, Ren Baqian muttered as he flipped the sofa to look for bullets. An electronic ringtone sounded. Ren Baqian found the phone on Jin Jun's body. When he saw the words Xiao Hui written on it, he answered the call. Brother Jun, Brother Wen is still waiting for you. When are you leaving? Upon hearing this, Ren Baqian immediately knew that it was most likely the driver waiting downstairs. Moreover, Brother Wen was Jin Wen, right? It seemed like he couldn't hide it for long. Cough cough. Ren Baqian coughed violently and spat. He pretended that his throat was uncomfortable and tried his best to imitate Jin Jun's voice. Come up. His voice was a little different. Ren Baqian hoped that the other party would think that his throat was uncomfortable, which was why his voice had changed. Brother Jun, is your throat uncomfortable? I'm coming, the person on the other side of the phone said. Ren Baqian hung up the phone to vent his anger. It seemed like he could hide it for a while longer. Ren Baqian first dragged the 3 corpses to a corner, then sat on the sofa and waited for the other party to come in. Brother Jun? After a while, a person's voice came from the door. Soon after, the door was pulled open. The other party wasn't very prepared. As soon as the person came in, he saw a handsome but blood-stained young man pointing a pistol at him. Before he could shout out, Ren Baqian pulled the trigger. After closing the door, Ren Baqian turned to look inside the house and sighed. Although the place had been cleaned up, there were still bloodstains in the corners of the walls and the cracks in the floor. There were also bullet holes in the floor and sofa. Even if he cleaned up the corpses, he would immediately be exposed if the police came looking for him. Not to mention the surveillance cameras that showed only a few people coming up the elevator. The evidence was conclusive. Chapter 252. Ren Baqian closed the door and squatted in front of the young man. The young man's mouth was foaming with blood like a crab. His eyes were filled with fear. He did not expect that the person waiting for him was not Jin Jun, but another young man. Furthermore, he could feel that his life was slipping away from him. I think you can still be saved. Ren Baqian squatted in front of him with a kind face. That's why you have to speak quickly. If you don't speak quickly, there will be no hope. Where is Jinwon? The young man continued to spit out blood. His neck was like an old hen's for a long time, but he could not say a word. It can't be. Rin Baqian was flabbergasted. Where did he hit? He carefully looked at the bleeding spots on the young man's body. One was shot in the lung, and the other was near the heart. It was already good enough that the young man was not dead, let alone talking. When he finished looking at the wounds, the young man finally let out a squeak and stopped breathing. Actually, I aimed for his stomach. Do you believe me? Ren Baqian looked disappointed. He did not care whether the young man could hear him or not. This time he really had to escape. There were still Jin Won and Jin Wu in the Jin family. He was afraid that they would come for him before tomorrow. He only had two choices. One was to wait for them to come and continue to kill them. However, even if he killed them, it would be useless. He could not carry so many corpses away. Furthermore, it would be easy for the police to stop him at home. The other choice was to escape. Ren Baqian felt wronged. In a year or two, the green vine hangover medicine would be on the market. In another 2 or 3 years, the black mud cream and leukemia medicine would also be on the market. At that time, he would have money and status. He would be able to reach the pinnacle of his life and win the heart of a rich and beautiful woman. But now, all his hopes were dashed. Rin Baqian went back to his room to take a shower, change his clothes, and gave Qingqing a call. Then he carried the things that he had just packed and hurriedly went downstairs. As for the corpses, he did not care. This house could not be kept. It was a pity that he had just bought it. 5 people had died consecutively. He did not know if anyone would dare to live in this house in the future. In any case, Ren Baqian felt that the feng shui of this house was not very good. Half an hour later, Ren Baqian carried a suitcase and appeared at a bank not far away with Qingqing. He withdrew 1 million yuan in cash and placed it in the suitcase. He then transferred the remaining 20 million yuan to Qingqing. Because of this, the bank manager interrogated him about the purpose of the transfer, fearing that it was money laundering. What do you want to do? Qingqing frowned and had a look of surprise on his face. Even a fool would know that something was wrong with the situation. We'll talk after we get out of here, Ren Baqian whispered. After settling the matter with the bank manager, Ren Baqian and Qingqing carried their suitcases and left the bank. Ren Baqian also took out the luggage that he had previously placed in his car and stuffed it into Qingqing's car. Then he turned around and said, I have something to attend to and have to run away. As for the money I just transferred to you, find someone to transfer it to a certain card through other channels. I'll let you know when the time comes. At this moment, Ren Baqian had an innocent and helpless look on his face. He looked as miserable as a bullied child could be. He was just short of tears and snot. He transferred the money to Qingqing because he was afraid that if the police froze his bank account, he would be in trouble. Even if it wasn't frozen, the moment he withdrew the money, he would be exposed. Now he could only hope that Qingqing could use other channels to help him launder a sum of money. As for whether Qingqing would embezzle this sum of money and whether the Chen family would swallow up his shares, there was no need to consider these questions now. So serious? If you offended Jin Jun, it won't be to that extent. I'll think of a way for you. Qingqing frowned. It's more serious than you think. Ren Baqian didn't mention that he had killed someone. In a while, send me the addresses of the few important people in the Jin family, especially the places where they usually go at night. Send it to another phone. Ren Baqian left the phone number that he had prepared for the Empress to Qingqing. In his heart, he was thinking that he would definitely bring the Empress back next time. You have caused me so much trouble, I have to let you reunite with your family. A famous person once said that the most important thing for a family was to be neat and tidy. When Qingqing heard Ren Baqian's words, he was a little apprehensive and asked, What are you going to do? Just send it to me. Even if you don't know, your father will know. Don't ask about other things first. You will know tomorrow or the day after. After Ren Baqian finished speaking, he opened the door of Qingqing's car and swaggered off. Qingqing, who was left at the same spot, had a gloomy look on his face. Where should I run to now? Ren Baqian pondered. Logically speaking, he should run overseas. No matter what, for lives were still a big case. However, he couldn't go too far now. There were still so many people from the Jean family waiting for him. It was a pity that he didn't have sarin gas with him. Forget it, even if he had it, he wouldn't dare to throw it. Killing people and throwing poisonous gas were two different things. If he dared to throw it, there would be no place in the world where he could hide. Now he only had two choices. He could either run to the mountains or hide in the city. As long as he could hide for 2.5 days, he would be fine. Now almost half a day had passed. There were still 2 days left. If he was optimistic, the Jean family would still need half a day to find his house. That would be 1.5 days. Renbachian couldn't make up his mind about these two choices. After all, he didn't have much experience in escaping. Just as he was aimlessly driving out of the city, his gaze swept across a shop by the street. He immediately stopped the car by the roadside. It was a musical instrument shop. Eru. Renbachian's eyes were practically brimming with tears when he saw this shop. If he knew about Eru, would he need to run away? All he had to do was to bring the Empress and annihilate the entire Jean family. This was simply a murder case caused by an Eru. A single slip may cause everlasting sorrow. Looking back, you become a wanted criminal. Renbachian sighed and got out of the car. He ran into the shop and picked out the Eru for a long time. He even played Laughing in the Pugilistic World, which made the shop owner gasp in amazement. This was the first time he saw someone play Laughing in the Pugilistic World in such a miserable manner. After throwing the Eru into the car, Renbachian decided to hide in the wilderness. There were too many surveillance cameras in the city, and he didn't have much experience in hiding. He ran to an outdoor shop and bought a big backpack and a light sleeping bag. Then he found a delicatessen and bought 3 caddies of braised beef. Finally, he bought 2 bottles of white wine and 2 loaves of bread. After parking the car in a remote place, Renbachian stuffed everything into the backpack. He tied the sleeping bag to the backpack and carried the suitcase in one hand and the Eru in the other. He flagged down a car and drove to another remote place. Seeing that it was surrounded by long walls and there didn't seem to be any surveillance cameras, Renbachian got out of the car and waited for a while. Then he flagged down another taxi and went to Beijing County. After arriving, he changed to another taxi and headed to the Old Balding Mountain. This mountain was more than 1,000 meters tall and had a large forest area. It hadn't been developed and was suitable for hiding. He didn't know how much of an impact he would have on the other party's tracking. In any case, he could only try his best to do what he thought of. When he reached the foot of the mountain, it was already dark. Without any delay, he bought a flashlight and climbed the mountain overnight. Panting and crawling for a few hundred meters, Renbachian truly felt that having too much money could crush someone to death. That box of money and the weight of the suitcase didn't exceed 25 caddies. It was getting heavier and heavier in his hands. There were a few times when he wanted to throw the suitcase away. However, when he thought that he still needed money when he was on the run, he persevered. At this point in time, more than half a day had passed, and there were less than 2 days left. At this moment, Chen Qing was sitting in a small shop at the entrance of the neighborhood where Renbachian lived. He looked at the police cars going in and out of the shop window and remained silent. 2 hours ago, he already knew what had happened. Renbachian had actually killed that Jin Jun. Furthermore, he had killed 4 people and drove his own car to escape. No wonder it was as though he was making funeral arrangements today. As for why Jin Jun was at Renbachian's house, he had some guesses, but he wasn't sure. I really couldn't tell. Jiang Nan, who was sitting opposite him, was in a daze. She didn't know how to evaluate Renbachian. She had never expected Renbachian to do such a thing. It was really unexpected. At this point in time, all the police officers in the city and a large number of hooligans were looking for Renbachian. Early the next morning, the people at the police station had already obtained some information on Renbachian's whereabouts. After killing 4 people, that person went to the bank to withdraw money and transferred the rest of the money to someone else. Everyone could understand this. It also showed that this criminal was very dangerous and had a very strong mental fortitude. He was completely unlike an ordinary person. How could an ordinary person calmly make all sorts of arrangements after doing such a thing? However, what he did next made everyone puzzled. That person actually went to a musical instrument shop to buy an arrow? And he even played the song, Laughing Wanderer? What kind of situation was this? Chapter 253. Renbachian heard the barking from afar and knew that the police were here. They were fast, much faster than he expected. He didn't know if the police solved the case quickly, or if the Jean family was powerful. Even though he didn't make any arrangements, he had changed cars a few times. It would take some time for the police to track his route, right? Renbachian sat on the rock and pondered. He couldn't just leave like this, right? Even if he were to leave, he had to let them know that he had been here. Thinking of this, he took out a pen and paper from his bag, wrote a note, and pressed it on the rock. Then he disappeared before the other party saw him. Half a day later, a team of policemen followed the police dogs to this place and saw a note. The handwriting on the note looked like it was scratched by a chicken's claw. It took them a long time to recognize the words on the note. Comrades, you have worked hard. Everyone flew into a rage after reading the words on the note. Everyone was gnashing their teeth. This murderer was too daring and arrogant. This was simply a provocation. However, the police dogs only circled around this area and couldn't detect any aura anymore. It was as if the person had disappeared from this place. Hundreds of police officers searched the mountain for 5 days, but in the end, they couldn't even find a strand of hair. Only that note made everyone gnash their teeth in anger, swearing to arrest this guy and bring him to justice. Sigh. When Renbachian returned to Pingle Park, he started to sigh again. He threw his things on the ground, took out the arrow, and played a sad song. Trouble caused by the moon. The guards outside looked as if they had seen a ghost. I admit that it's all because of the arrow. That kind of night is too beautiful, and you are too gentle. After he finished singing, Renbachian felt the knot in his heart lighten a little. He didn't provoke anyone, but he abandoned his family and business to become a wanted criminal. He even had to hide in the mountain for 2 days. When he was hungry, he ate braised beef. When he was thirsty, he drank erguotu. It could be said that he was miserable. After sighing for a long time, Renbachian washed his face, changed his clothes, and ran to see the Empress. Your Majesty, all the clothes you left at home are gone. Renbachian sighed when he saw the Empress. The Empress raised her eyebrows. She liked many of those clothes. Furthermore, who dared to touch her things? Even the house is gone. What's the matter? The Empress asked coldly. From her tone, one could tell that she was very unhappy. I was too careless. I didn't think that the other party would stop after attacking me last time, and come directly to my house. I had no choice but to kill him. However, I also became a fugitive because of this. Now, I have a home that I can't return to, and I have to hide from place to place. Fortunately, I saw a musical instrument shop on my way to escape. I remembered that I promised Your Majesty to bring back an arrow, so I didn't dare to throw it away even when I was escaping. Fortunately, he had returned safely. However, I'm afraid I'll be hunted down again when I return. Renbachian looked aggrieved and took out the arrow at the right time. This time around, he didn't forget to play it. The Empress's heart softened when she saw his appearance and said, Forget it, it's good that you are back. I will go with you next time and see what they can do. At present, Renbachian wasn't in the mood to play Pomp and Circumstance, but he was in the mood to play Second Spring Reflecting the Moon. Fortunately, the Empress didn't mention it, and was very considerate of him. After 2 days, Renbachian's mood was finally better. After all, things had already come to this point, and it was useless to sigh. Being a fugitive wasn't a serious matter for Renbachian now. He could teleport once every 2 to 3 days, and it would take about 10 days for him to appear again. It wouldn't be easy for the other party to catch him. Even if he was caught, as long as he wasn't killed on the spot, he could bring the Empress back and directly break out of prison. However, he couldn't stay in the country anymore and could only go abroad. In fact, it wasn't that there was no other way. For example, he could go to a big country for plastic surgery and change his appearance. However, It was hard to say how the Empress would react when she saw his completely new face. Renbaqian thought about it, and decided to continue to escape with this face. On the third day, Renbaqian and the Empress sat in the garden. It was a sunny morning. In the distance, Qin Yuan, Hong Yuan, and the two imperial guards looked curiously at the strange thing in Renbaqian's hand, and kept guessing what he was going to do. The Empress's face was full of anticipation. She also didn't know what an arrow performance would be like. However, when Renbaqian said that he would play it for her, she was full of anticipation, and felt a little sweet in her heart. Renbaqian struck a pose with a face full of confidence. He had trained hard to play the little Wuxia version of Pomp and Circumstance. Then, he took a deep breath. When the delicate moans of the arrow came out, the Empress immediately got goosebumps all over her body, and her eyes widened. The surrounding imperial guards tensed up and looked as if they had seen a ghost. What was this thing? It gave people the feeling that the arrow in Renbaqian's hand had turned into a spirit. The delicate moans were full of enchantment. If one had to describe it, it would be coquettish. It was simply too coquettish. Renbaqian looked intoxicated. As the music progressed, it finally became a little more normal. However, even the cheerful rhythm at the climax was full of a seductive aura. Then 1, 2, 3 for the delicate moans were repeated again. The Empress exerted force and directly grabbed a piece of the stone table in front of her, but she didn't even feel it. She was really shocked. Her face was filled with shock and a little bewilderment. Even when she was facing the 9 pavilions, she didn't have such a huge emotional fluctuation. Her heart, which was usually as calm as a lake, was now like a landslide and a tsunami. She couldn't calm down even for a moment with the sound of the arrow. When the Empress heard the delicate moans, the veins on her forehead started to bulge. Qin Yuan and Hong Yuan were already stunned. Both of them looked at Renbaqian with their mouths wide open. Those imperial guards looked as if they were constipated, and their whole bodies were trembling. Before Renbaqian could finish playing the piece that he was so proud of, the stone table had already started to fall piece by piece. The Empress subconsciously used her fingers to scratch the surface of the stone table. Half of the stone table that was half a foot thick had disappeared. Renbaqian only played halfway before abruptly stopping. He had a look of longing on his face. This was because the Little Wuxia version only stopped here. It was said that the neighbor of Little Wuxia smashed the door and barged in. Renbaqian felt that he had never performed so smoothly before. He was so engrossed in his performance today. He opened his eyes and looked at the Empress with a face full of admiration. Your Majesty, why are there blue veins on your forehead? The Empress snatched the arrow and threw it dozens of meters away like a concealed weapon to the imperial guards. She gritted her teeth and said, "Suppress this thing under the plaza in front of the palace." The 2 imperial guards felt as if they had been granted amnesty. Without saying a word, they carried the arrow and dashed out. Chapter 254. Halfway up the mountain, it was pitch black. Only the dim moon in the sky shone a little silver light. 2 people were standing there. One of them was squatting in a Slavic posture, while the other was standing straight like a javelin. The night wind blew her long hair. "I've asked someone to watch your family. The police are keeping an eye on you. Be more careful. Try not to call home." There were 2 messages. The first one was about Jin Wen and Jin Wu's possible locations at night. The other one was about this. Sigh. Renbaqian wanted to sigh again. Every time he thought about this, he felt like he was constipated. After a while, Renbaqian stood up and looked into the distance with a solemn face. "Your Majesty, let's go." Like a chick, the Empress carried him by the back of his neck and leaped into the distance. After leaping for nearly 100 meters, she landed on the ground. The wind blew on Renbaqian's face. Even though he was being carried by the neck like a chick, Renbaqian still managed to maintain his solemn face. Feeling the oncoming gale, he was inspired to write a poem and silently recited, "There will be a time when the wind breaks the waves." The last sentence was to hang the sail to save the vast sea. However, Renbaqian was now the one being held by the Empress, fluttering in the wind. Moving at a speed of 300 miles per hour on the mountain, The Empress leaped more than 10 meters into the air. This was really too exciting. Even though he knew that nothing would happen, Renbaqian's heart was still racing like an elevator following the Empress's movements. It was 9 o'clock in the evening. With the Empress's speed, she could cover a distance of more than 200 kilometers in an hour. Renbaqian had a lingering wish. It would be great if the Empress could carry him on her back. It would be much better than being carried like a flag fluttering in the wind. Jinwen put down the document in his hand, took off his reading glasses, and rubbed his temples. Is there still no news of that kid? Jinwen asked. Yes, brother one. A man in a shirt standing beside him replied. Jinwen rubbed his temples and picked up another piece of paper. On it was a photo of a young man. This was all of Renbaqian's information. He had seen it more than once. Up until now, he was still a little surprised that such a person could actually kill his third brother and 3 other subordinates. Also, where did that brat go? It had been half a month. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. It had been so long, but they still couldn't find him. Third brother's wife was making a fuss every day, and the people below were also restless. If he really let this kid run away, his face would be thrown into the ditch. The police are still watching his hometown? Jinwen asked. Yes, but they are about to withdraw, the man said again. When the time comes, I'll arrange for his family to die a good death. Don't be too quick. Take it slow. I don't believe that kid won't show up, Jinwen said casually. Killing someone was difficult, but sometimes it was also very simple. A simple accident was all that mattered. After saying that, Jinwen took out a box of tea leaves from his drawer and placed it in a covered bowl. The man in the shirt quickly boiled a pot of water, but Jinwen still made the tea himself. This was his habit. At that moment, the window opposite Jinwen's room suddenly exploded. Then 2 figures appeared in the room. The sudden change stunned Jinwen. One had to know that this was the 17th floor. How could someone break the window and come in? However, he didn't slow down. He immediately took out a gun from the drawer and pointed it at the other party. Only then did he carefully identify the 2 figures. One of them was a man. He wasn't very eye-catching, but he looked somewhat familiar. The other was the woman beside him. He couldn't take his eyes off her. Brother one, it's that kid. The man in the shirt cried out in surprise. A little doubt emerged in Jinwen's mind. That kid. Then he realized who it was. It was the kid with the surname Run who killed his third brother. After taking a closer look at the 2 of them, he didn't see any ropes on their bodies. This made him a little puzzled as to how they came in. However, a cold smile hung on his face. Although I have always hoped that you would appear in front of me, I didn't expect it to be like this. As he spoke, he pulled the trigger. 6 gunshots rang out in succession. 4 of them were shot at the woman in red, and the other 2 were shot at Renbaqian. It couldn't be helped. The appearance of these 2 people was too strange. If he didn't beat them half to death first, he wouldn't be able to rest easy. However, the red-clothed woman's arm seemed to shake, but it also seemed like she didn't move at all. Everything was just an illusion. On the other hand, the 2 of them were still standing there unscathed. Renbaqian widened his eyes in shock. This old bastard was actually more ruthless than him? Why didn't he say anything and just open fire? Jinwen was even more shocked than Renbaqian. He had fired all the bullets in his pistol in one go, but the 2 of them were still unscathed. What the hell? Jinwen immediately had this thought in his mind, and his forehead was covered in cold sweat. The Empress looked calm and collected. With a wave of her palm, more than 10 bullets flew out. The man standing a meter away from Jinwen was instantly beaten into a sieve. Zixiao, your kung fu is really unparalleled in the world. Renbaqian gave her a thumbs up. The Empress's face turned even darker and her eyes turned cold. She subconsciously rubbed her fingers and wished she could throw it again. The man's body was covered in blood, and he fell to the ground with a thud. Both of you, we can talk about anything. Jinwen looked panicked. Even though he was used to great storms, he couldn't help but panic in this situation. The other party wasn't even afraid of guns. Who said that this guy was an ordinary person? Renbaqian saw the panic on Jinwen's face. As he spoke, he took out a magazine from the drawer and reloaded it into his gun. It was as if the gun in his hand gave him a sense of security. Pow! Rinpochian raised his gun, and blood immediately burst out from Jinwen's head. Rinpochian looked constipated. I was aiming at his shoulder. I haven't finished talking. Is it settled? The Empress turned to look at him with a questioning look. We're still missing Jinwu. He might be on the 17th floor of this building or somewhere else. Rinpochian looked innocent. He had something to say for a long time, but he didn't even have the chance to say it. After a while, Rinpochian found Jinwu in a high-end residential area. At that time, he was doing something indescribable with a woman. Their loud and resounding screams were heard directly. The Empress had just landed, saw the situation in the house, and heard the screams. She felt as if a layer of ice had been scraped off her face. Without saying anything, she struck Jinwu and the woman with her palm. Before they could react, they were stuck to the wall. Rinpochian looked at the wall full of blood and felt sullen. Why is it so difficult to say something? People say that not returning to one's hometown after becoming rich is like walking at night in brocade clothes. It's the same for revenge. At least let me finish my words. In the end, Rinpochian had no choice but to find a piece of paper in the room and write his words on it for others to see. It was still written in chicken claw-like handwriting. People say that the most important thing for a family is to be neat and tidy. Now we're all together. He placed the paper directly on the bed. Rinpochian's face finally revealed a satisfied look. Next, he searched the room and found Jinwu's son, who was beaten to death by Rinpochian in the living room. Zixiao, you are blushing. Rinpochian was carried by the Empress and shuttled between the tall buildings. He turned his head to look at the Empress and said this abruptly. The Empress panicked when she heard this. Her hand trembled, and Rinpochian fell with a blood-curdling scream. Your Majesty, save me. Rinpochian looked at the ground that was getting closer and closer to him, and his voice turned into a blood-curdling scream. When he was grabbed by the Empress, his heart almost jumped out of his chest. No one would know if they were free-falling from such a high altitude. What's that sound? More than one person in the room heard the blood-curdling scream outside, but there was nothing when they looked out of the window. Rinpochian lay on the rooftop and gasped for breath. He was really scared just now. If the Empress was a little slower, he would have become a meat patty. The Empress stood at the edge of the rooftop and looked down. She thought of something she saw just now and panicked. Zixiao. I was scared to death just now. Rinpochian lay on the ground and didn't want to move at all. He was really scared just now. The Empress acted as if she didn't hear what he said. After a long time, she finally calmed down. She turned her head and looked at Rinpochian coldly. Where are we going next? There are still a few places. We are still short of 4 people. Rinpochian lay on the ground with one hand covering his heart. Point the way. Following which, the two of them went to a few more places and finally completed the mission. Jinwen, Jinwu, and their wives and children were finally reunited. Although it sounded a little cruel, Rinpochian felt that it would be cruel to himself if he left one of them alive. As for the rest, he didn't need to care about them as they would be in a mess. Late at night, Rinpochian and the Empress stood on the rooftop of a building. The place opposite them was a very comical place for him. At the city police station, Rinpochian sat at the edge of the rooftop and took out his phone to make a call. He had just swiped the phone. Hello? The phone rang twice before it was picked up. It was Papachin who sounded very tired. Dad. Rinpochian said softly. Bachien? Where are you? How are you now? What exactly happened? The police said that you killed someone. Upon hearing Rinpochian's voice, Papachin immediately lowered his voice and asked anxiously. Meanwhile, at the police station of T-City and S-City, that fellow has appeared. Following a shout and a wave of panic, everyone crowded around the computer. Each and every one of them had a look of surprise on their faces. That bastard had finally appeared. Nowadays, it wasn't as troublesome to use a surveillance van like in the past. They just had to think of a way to plant a virus in the phone. I'm fine, don't worry, Rinpochian said in a relaxed tone. It's good that you are fine. If you are wrongly accused, then turn yourself in. Your mother and I will definitely help you clear your name. Papachin hesitated for a while, and said in a deep voice. Until now he still didn't believe that his son would kill someone. In his heart, Renbaqian started his business last year. His conditions were getting better and better, and he even gave a large sum of money to his family. Why would he give up such a bright future and kill someone? I am really wrongly accused. Renbaqian felt wronged. Upon hearing this, Papachin immediately felt that his son was indeed wrongly accused. His face revealed a look of surprise. Renbaqian could even hear his mother's panting from the other end of the phone. Don't worry, both of you. I'm fine. I know the rest, and it's not convenient for me to say too much. Just know that I'm doing well. Renbaqian continued to speak in a relaxed tone. Renbaqian spoke to his parents for 2 minutes before hanging up the phone and throwing it on the rooftop behind him. At the opposite police station, a large number of people had already rushed out. A few minutes later, the police rushed up to the rooftop and only saw a phone on the floor. The rest was empty. They searched the entire building for a whole night, but still couldn't find any trace of Renbaqian. The phone that Renbaqian used belonged to Jin Jun's son. It was very easy to find him. When the police arrived at Jin Jun's house, they only saw 3 corpses. Following that was Jin Wan, Jin Wu, and the note on the bed in Jin Wu's room. People say that the most important thing for a family is to be in order. Now we are all in order. When they saw this note, it was unknown how many people gnashed their teeth in hatred. A total of 11 members of the Jin family were killed in different places in one night. This wasn't just an ordinary murder case. Furthermore, there was a note left behind by the murderer. It was simply showing off and provoking. While simply too vile and insane. Chapter 255. A young man with glasses was browsing the largest video website when he suddenly noticed a video titled "Cultivators Really Exist" that had just been uploaded half a minute ago. Out of curiosity, he clicked on the video. The picture was a little blurry, which was caused by the phone shooting at night. Judging from the opposite floor in the video, the position of the person who shot the video should be between the 7th and 9th floor. At the same time, a miserable voice came from the speaker. Help! It sounded like a chicken being slaughtered. Then he saw a man falling from the sky on the screen, which made his heart skip a beat. He couldn't help but curse. Immortal cultivator, my ass. Someone obviously fell from the building. At this moment, the figure that was falling suddenly disappeared. He retreated and looked carefully again. He saw that 2 people suddenly appeared on the opposite wall of the tall building, and then disappeared again. One of them was the person who fell from the building, and the other seemed to be a woman. It's fake, right? He muttered subconsciously, and was ready to refresh the video to watch it again. However, when he refreshed it again, he found that the video was lost. Damn, it can't be real, right? If he had thought it was fake before, then the video had disappeared so quickly, which made his imagination run wild. Conspiracy theories had always been believed by many people. Boss, look at this video. As a young man called out, a man in his 30s walked behind him and watched. It was the video that had just been uploaded half a minute ago, but the clarity was much higher. Especially after the brightness was adjusted, the 2 figures in the picture were even more conspicuous. It's fake, the man in his 30s concluded at a glance. Boss, this hasn't been processed. It looks real. Impossible, the man in his 30s concluded. In the video, a woman could be seen rushing at the falling figure at a super high speed. She lifted his clothes and brought him to the opposite wall. Then, she stepped on the wall and rushed up diagonally. This was simply impossible. The speed at which a person fell from a high altitude was about 23 meters per second. The speed of the woman in the video was far faster than that. It was not something that a human could achieve. After watching the video 3 times, the man in his 30s looked solemn. Although his reason told him that it was impossible, everything in the video was too real. Most importantly, this video was taken with a mobile phone, and had not been modified by any software. In other words, it was very likely to be true. The next morning, this video and the case in S City were spread to some people's desks. Both happened in the same place. In the case of Severny, 11 people died in different locations within an hour. This was not something that one or two people could do. At the very least, several groups of people had to work together. But at every crime scene, there were only traces of the same man and woman. Coupled with this video, it immediately made some people feel as if they had discovered something incredible, something that could change the perception of mankind. Find him. Don't use force. Talk to him first. Such an order and the information of the two people were sent to a certain department. One of them had detailed information, while the other only had an ID card. The boundless horizon is my love. Flowers are blooming at the foot of the rolling green mountains. A dilapidated off-road vehicle was running wildly on the grassland. At present, Renbachian and the Empress were in MG Nation in the north. It was more than 600 kilometers away, and both of them had rushed here in one night. Then they randomly found an unlucky guy, knocked him out, and threw him to the side of the road. Now, Renbachian had already given up. He had already done vile things, and there was no longer any psychological pressure to do other things. In any case, if he was caught, he would be dragged out and shot for 5 minutes. In any case, they wouldn't be able to catch him. In any case, even if they caught him, he could still escape from prison. Renbachian's current target was the country in the north that was known as a fighting nation. It was a country that would duel with bears and beat them until they cried. When he arrived there, he would head west toward Europe. At that time, he might stop at a country in Eastern Europe or go to South America. He heard that it was more chaotic there. To ordinary people, chaos was a terrible thing, but to him it wasn't a big deal as long as he didn't get shot in the back. Every 7 days he could increase his strength by 15 kilograms. Now his strength had already reached 225 kilograms. In addition, he was ravaged by that little girl with 2 buns on her head every day. Renbachian felt that he could survive anywhere. Moreover, he was still getting stronger. Even if he couldn't reach the level of the Empress, he could still do whatever he wanted once he reached the level of the winged cavalry. The air here is much better, the Empress said casually as she looked at the boundless grassland outside. In Dayo, there were many places like this. Furthermore, the air here was even better. However, compared to S-City, this place could already be considered as heaven. Your Majesty, do you want to try driving? Renbachian suggested. In any case, it was impossible to drive over such a boundless grassland. Why not let the Empress have some fun and treat it as a go-kart? All right. The Empress didn't really care. It was fine to give it a try. After Renbachian taught the Empress how to turn, the gear, the accelerator, and the brake, the two of them changed positions. The Empress was fully focused on the front. She stepped on the brake with one foot. When she realized that the car wasn't moving, she stepped on the accelerator as if nothing had happened, and stepped on it to the end. Renbachian, who was caught off guard, was almost thrown into the back seat. Zixiao, you scared me. Renbachian sat up straight and patted his chest. What do we do now? The Empress suddenly asked. Her voice was very calm and steady. What do you mean? Renbachian turned his head and looked at the Empress with a puzzled look. He saw that the Empress was holding onto the steering wheel. There was nothing wrong with it. The problem was that only the steering wheel was in the Empress's hands. She actually pulled it out. Renbachian stared blankly. He looked at the boundless grassland in front of them, and then looked at the steering wheel in the Empress's hands. Finally, he sighed and said, Let's do it this way. In any case, it's a grassland and the car won't overturn. If the car really overturns, Zixiao, you must help me out. Half an hour later, Renbachian looked at the off-road vehicle that had rolled on the ground for tens of meters before finally collapsing to one side. He then looked at the surroundings. Where could he find another car now? After being carried by the Empress and fluttering in the wind for half an hour, the two of them sat in the off-road vehicle again. This vehicle was slightly newer than the previous one, but this time around, Renbachian wasn't prepared to let the Empress try a go-kart again. After another day, the two of them had already arrived at Renbachian's original destination, our nation. At night, Renbachian and the Empress walked on the streets of an unfamiliar city. They were surrounded by tall Caucasians, which made the Empress frown from time to time. The different races of people around her made her feel somewhat uncomfortable. Even if Great Xia and Deya were two different nations, it still wouldn't make her feel this way. Ren Baqian looked around and saw that all the words were indecipherable. The people around him also spoke in a language that he couldn't understand. This caused him to be at a loss for a moment. Suddenly, a bald burly man took 2 quick steps forward and stuck close to Ren Baqian's back. He placed a sharp object on Ren Baqian's waist and said fiercely, "Eh." Chapter 256. Ren Baqian was at a loss and did not know what the other party was talking about. When the other party saw that Ren Baqian did not respond, his face became even more ferocious. At the same time, another person came over and stretched out his hand to pull the Empress into the alley at the side. Before he could touch the Empress, he was sent flying and spat out a pile of broken internal organs in midair. The bald man behind Ren Baqian had a ferocious look on his face. He exerted force in his hand and expected to feel the dagger stabbing into a human body. However, the dagger in his hand was caught by something and could not move at all. Unknowingly, the Empress had grabbed the dagger in his hand. With a gentle twist and a push, the dagger directly pierced into the bald man's abdomen. Following which, the Empress slapped the burly man's head. The contents of his head immediately spurted out from his nose, mouth, and ears. By the time Ren Baqian reacted, the dust had already settled. Ren Baqian turned his head to look behind him, and then looked at the calm Empress. He immediately covered his face with a face full of sorrow. They had just run over from China. Before they could even see what the first city was like, the two of them were going to become wanted criminals in our nation again. Their days were simply unbearable. One of his eyes scanned the area outside his palm. There was actually no one nearby. There were only a few figures in the distance. There were also cars driving over from afar. However, the distance was too far, and he could not see clearly what was happening here. This wasn't like China. Even in a small county, the streets would be filled with uncles and aunties at night. This place was much more deserted than China. Ren Baqian immediately rejoiced. "Zixiao, drag them into the alley. Otherwise, we will be hunted down again." The Empress rolled her eyes at Ren Baqian. She was a little dissatisfied with his instructions. However, in a flash, she dragged the man who was sent flying by her over. Ren Baqian also dragged the bald man on the ground into the alley. In such a dark corner, it was very difficult for outsiders to notice. This made Ren Baqian feel more at ease. First, he ransacked the wallets of the two men. Their wallets added up to a total of more than 3,000 rubles. Ren Baqian did not understand the exchange rate and did not know the prices here. He did not even know if it was enough for the two of them to have a meal. However, he still took it first. This time, he only had 20,000 rubles in his pocket and had not had the opportunity to exchange them yet. Ren Baqian asked the Empress to send the two of them to the rooftop. He stood at the entrance of the alley and scanned the surroundings. There weren't any surveillance cameras in the vicinity, and no one noticed what happened just now. It could be considered a silver lining in this misfortune. There were bloodstains on the ground from when the bald man was dragged in, but it would take at least 2 or 3 days to find the corpse on the roof. By that time, he would have already left. Ren Baqian turned around and looked at the Empress. The Empress's eyes were clear and bright. At first, Ren Baqian wanted to advise her not to be in a hurry to make a move. However, after thinking that the other party was already holding a knife at his waist, he decided to just let it be. Previously, when she was fighting with Turkey, the Empress had never wantonly used her martial arts. Presumably, she knew what she was doing. "Are you cold?" Ren Baqian asked. It was currently summer in July, but the temperature at night should be less than 20 degrees Celsius. Ren Baqian could feel a trace of coolness even though he was wearing a short-sleeved shirt. As for the Empress, this kind of temperature didn't affect her at all. However, he still wanted to ask something. He felt somewhat apologetic that the Empress had helped him kill people and accompanied him in being hunted. The Empress turned around and looked at him. Under the dim light of the night, the Empress's eyes were very bright. Ren Baqian felt that they were like stars. "Where are we going next?" the Empress asked. "Let's find something to eat first." Ren Baqian touched his pockets. Now he was only left with money. However, he didn't know if the shops here accepted RMB. They found a roadside restaurant and ate Russian stewed meat, roasted potatoes, and a bottle of vodka. The taste was a little strange, and she wasn't used to it. However, the Empress liked the vodka very much. After this meal, he was only left with 200 out of the 3,000 rubles that he looted from them previously. It wasn't even enough for accommodation. Furthermore, it was obvious that the Empress wasn't full. However, when Renbachian took out the RMB, she immediately shook her head. This made him feel somewhat helpless. I might as well rob someone. Renbachian pondered in his heart. This idea was just a thought. In the end, he didn't put it into action. Renbachian felt that he still had a bottom line. In the end, the two of them stayed by the riverside for a night. The next morning, they went to the bank to exchange some rubles and found a place to rest for the day. At night, they left the city and found a secluded corner before returning to Dayo. 3 days after the two of them left, 3 people came to this city to inquire about the Empress. After all, the Empress's appearance and red dress made her very recognizable. It was very easy for a group of people to inquire about the two of them. Furthermore, they also noticed a strange case in this city. One of the people seemed to have been hit by a car, and his internal organs were almost all smashed into pieces. The other person looked fine on the surface, but his brain suffered a heavy blow. Brain juice directly spurted out from his 5 orifices. Now, not only did he do it, but he also didn't feel any psychological burden. At most, he would feel a little sad because he couldn't go home and had to flee. There was a saying that he had seen in movies in the past: with great power comes great responsibility. Chapter 257. Somewhere in Great Xia, the cold wind was whistling, and the surrounding forest was covered in white. Jia. 7 or 8 horsemen were galloping on the official road at full speed, and the pedestrians on the road all gave way to them. The man in front was dressed in embroidered clothes with a fur cloak draped over his shoulders. He looked young, and his face was cold. The people behind him were all dressed in tight clothes and cloaks, and all of them had a small stream embroidered on their chests. This was the symbol of the Lian family, and anyone with some knowledge in the nearby prefectures could recognize it. After all, the Lian family was considered the #1 power in Zhejiang Prefecture. At this moment, other than the man in embroidered clothes who still looked cold, the rest of the people looked relaxed. This mission didn't require much effort, and the Lian family gave them a lot of points. Many people were thinking about whether they should exchange the points for money or exchange them for a martial arts manual. Just as they turned around a call, the man in embroidered clothes suddenly felt alarmed. He pressed his palms on the back of the horse, and his whole body flew out like a rock spreading its wings. At the same time, dozens of arrows were shot from both sides, and all of them were surrounded. The remaining 6 or 7 horsemen roared and wanted to draw their swords, but they were all hit by the arrows and fell off their horses. Only 2 of them managed to escape with injuries on their bodies. "Who's there? Come out!" The man in embroidered clothes shouted in the air, drew his sword, and pounced on the figures that appeared on both sides. "Zhu Qingjun, you'll stay here today." 2 figures followed the shout and flew forward. One of them was holding a serrated knife, and the back of the knife was serrated, which could be used to block people's weapons. The other person was holding a short stick. Zhu Qingjuan's expression changed when he saw the weapons in their hands. He knew both of them, and they were both from the Lian family. Among the 4 remaining consecrators of the Lian family, only the 2 of them were from the Lian family. The one holding the serrated knife was called Lianpeng, and the other was called Lianzhan. Zhu Qingjun blocked the long knife with his sword, and focused all his attention on the short stick. As expected, when it was about to get close to him, the short stick suddenly elongated, and a steel awl-like point emerged from the front end. It shook out 6 plum blossoms in the air, covering Zhu Qingjuan's entire body from top to bottom. As expected, Zhu Qingjun thought to himself, if he didn't happen to know the secret of his opponent's short rod, he would have fallen into his trap. A series of clanging sounds could be heard in the air. Zhu Qingjun exchanged a few moves with the other two. Even though he was fighting 1 against 2, he was only slightly at a disadvantage. Your strength has actually improved again. Considering your age, you are indeed a talent. Lian Zhan's expression changed in the air, and he could not help but praise. He did not expect that the two of them could only barely suppress him in a single exchange. A living talent is a talent, Lian Peng said coldly. You all. Zhu Qingjun was initially puzzled and angry. They were obviously all consecrated members of the Lian clan, so why did they suddenly attack him? Moreover, it seemed like they were determined to kill him. But at this moment, something suddenly flashed through his mind. You're here with the 7 branches sect to kill me? Zhu Qingjun shouted angrily after he landed. Go down and ask the king of hell, Lian Peng said coldly. After Zhu Qingjun landed on the ground, he scanned his surroundings and saw dozens of people surrounding him with knives in their hands. Lian Qizhi sent people to assassinate Qi Zixiao's lover, luring Qi Zixiao to the 9 pavilions. In the end, the 9 pavilions were destroyed, and Emperor Xia lost over 10,000 elite soldiers. Do you all think that you can live after killing me? Lian Qizhi killed me today, and tomorrow, it will be your turn. Hearing this, the faces of the 2 knights who were lucky enough to survive immediately turned pale, and filled with despair. Lian Peng's and Lian Zhan's expressions changed drastically. Then Lian Peng sneered and said, These people can't hear anything. You are wasting your efforts. As for the 2 of us, you don't have to worry about us. Zhu Qingjun glanced at the people around him and asked, Do you all think you can keep me here? What if you include me? A voice came from another direction. Lian Qizhi, how dare you appear? Zhu Qingjun gritted his teeth and looked over. You are at the peak of the man-will level. Halfway through his sentence he suddenly froze, and swallowed the remaining half of the sentence, I'll kill you first, into his stomach. Lian Qizhi's joints were cracking, and his qi and blood were rolling in his body like thunder. His aura was rising steadily from the peak of the man-will level, to the initial stage of the earth-will level, to the intermediate stage of the earth-will level, all the way to the advanced stage of the earth embryo level. Why do you think I am the master of the Lian family? Lian Qizhi was all smiles. At this moment he was 3 inches taller than before. Zhu Qingjun was speechless. Lian Qizhi had always revealed his strength at the peak of the man-will level to the outside world. Even though many people felt that he wasn't qualified to be the master. Unexpectedly, he was the most powerful person in the Lian family. Now you can go in peace. It's a pity that you don't have any family members. Otherwise, I could help you take good care of them. But it's good that you don't have to worry about being alone. Lian Qizhi smiled. I'll kill you. Zhu Qingjun looked like he was going to die. There were 3 Earthwill experts, and one of them was even at the advanced stage of the Earthwill level. He definitely couldn't escape. He raised his qi and blood to the maximum, and pounced on Lian Qizhi. Even if he died, he wanted to bite off a piece of flesh from Lian Qizhi's body. Lian Qizhi flipped his hands and shot out 13 silver beads in a row. All of them hit the body of Zhu Qingjuan's sword. When the last bead hit the sword, a dang sound was heard. The sword in Zhu Qingjuan's hand broke, and his shoulder was pierced by the remaining force of the last bead. His whole body rolled backward and landed on the ground. Zhu Qingjun covered his shoulder with one hand, and was overwhelmed with shock. His sword was considered a rare weapon that could even split a boulder in his hand. Yet, it was actually broken by the opponent's silver beads. Lian Qizhi was so strong? You can die in peace now, Lian Qizhi said softly as he didn't chase after Zhu Qingjun. Just when Zhu Qingjun knew that he was going to die for sure, and everyone thought that the outcome was a foregone conclusion, a burst of applause suddenly came from a tree not far away. Everyone was startled by the applause, especially Lian Qizhi. There was actually someone hiding in the vicinity without him noticing. Who exactly was it? They saw a young scholar sitting on the tree with a bookcase on his back. He looked like a scholar who was rushing to take an exam. After carefully sensing his aura, he wasn't much different from an ordinary person. However, no one realized that there was someone up there. Even a fool would know that he wasn't an ordinary person. At this moment, they didn't dare to act rashly. When I saw you guys coming over half a day ago, I already felt that it would be fun. I didn't expect it to be this fun. This is really too interesting. Qi Zixiao will definitely be very happy to receive you guys as a gift. The scholar was all smiles. Who are you? Lian Qiji was flustered, but he forced himself to remain calm on the surface. Sword come. The scholar didn't reply. Instead, he stretched out his hand towards the sky and let out a long cry. You are the sword master? Lian Qiji's facial expression changed. The other party was actually an extremely rare sword master. Furthermore, he didn't have his sword with him. Lian Qiji immediately felt extremely regretful. 18 silver beads in his hand shot towards the other party's body with a piercing sound. "Io, don't be anxious." The scholar seemed to have missed a step, and his entire body fell towards the bottom of the tree. At the same time, a long sword sneakily flew out of the forest and directly landed in the hands of the falling scholar. The scholar was Ning Kaichen and the sword was Lu Zhu. Ever since the last time she went to Dayo, Lu Zhu had been sneaking around like a thief. After a while, Ning Kaichen grabbed Zhu Qingjun with one hand and ran for his life like a happy rabbit. The bookcase behind him was inlaid with a whole row of silver beads. If it was taken off, it would be worth at least dozens of taels of silver. Lian Qiji's silver bullets could even penetrate a 1-foot-thick tree, but they couldn't penetrate this simple and crude bookcase. When I heard you say receive you guys as a gift, I thought you were going to tie them up and give them to Qi Zixiao. Zhu Qingjun endured the pain in his body and couldn't help but say. He didn't care whether the other party would answer him or not. Anyway, he just wanted to speak now. At this moment, Zhu Qingjun had a few more injuries on his body, especially on his legs. When Ning Kaichen appeared, he thought he had met an expert. He didn't expect the other party to actually grab him and run away. He should have thanked the other party for saving him, but he actually used him to block the silver bullets. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been so badly injured and his legs were badly mutilated. Anyway, I can just hand you over to Qi Zixiao. Why do I have to do it myself? Ning Kaichen's forehead was sweating. When he heard the shouting coming from behind, he quickened his pace. Chapter 258. A month later, a coachman with grizzled hair and a bald and ugly old horse pulled the carriage slowly into Lan City. Ning Kaichen opened the curtains and looked outside. There wasn't much difference from when he first arrived. Everywhere was filled with simple-looking aboriginals who revealed ferocious expressions when they saw outsiders. Zhu Qingjun was lying beside him. The injuries on other parts of his body were not obvious from the outside, but his legs were still tightly wrapped with a white cloth. Occasionally, when the carriage shook too much, faint blood would seep into the white cloth. An earthwheel expert's external injuries would usually scar in less than a day. After all, their physical fitness wasn't comparable to that of ordinary people. Even if his legs had suffered such a serious injury, it would normally take a week for them to recover. However, after a whole month, the wounds on his legs hadn't healed. As for the reason, Ning Kaichen had to ask him. Every day, he would give him big bowls of wine and let him eat a type of transparent prawn whose bloodlines could be seen. Zhu Qingjun didn't reject any of these and never questioned them. He just drank the wine and ate the prawn with an indifferent expression. Another important point was that he couldn't muster up much strength. Perhaps this was related to the wine and prawn. Do you have anything else to say? Ning Kaichen put down the curtains and turned to look at Zhu Qingjun. Last words? Can you help me achieve them? At this moment, Zhu Qingjun's body was much thinner than before. His face was paler, and there wasn't much luster in his eyes. You can tell me so that you can have some thoughts, Ning Kaichen said softly. He didn't have any hatred or opinions towards Zhu Qingjun. Zhu Qingjun even saved his life. The reason why he didn't let Zhu Qingjun's wounds heal was simple. He wasn't confident that he could watch over an earthwheel expert 24 hours a day. However, if the other party was seriously injured, it would be easy. My parents are long dead, and there's nothing to care about. I heard that the people of Dayo like to bury the dead under the plaza. Please find another place to bury me. I don't want to die in peace. Also dig the pit deeper. I don't want to be dug out by stray dogs, Zhu Qingjun said faintly. I'll try my best. Ning Kaichen felt that he could fulfill this wish of hers. He had brought such a big piece of news to Qi Zixiao, and even brought her over. She probably wouldn't mind such a small request, right? From Ning Kaichen's point of view, Qi Zixiao was still relatively easy to talk to. Other than her outstanding martial arts, she was a little cold, a little arrogant, a little bad-tempered, and a little ruthless. Compared to those who would turn their backs on him, such as the people from the 9 pavilions, she was much better. At this moment, the carriage suddenly stopped. Ning Kaichen lifted the curtain and realized that the carriage was already parked by the roadside. He could hear the sound of hooves coming from behind. He knew that it was Dayo's cavalry, so he went back into the carriage. He wouldn't do something so stupid as to fight with the aboriginal cavalry in Lan City. It didn't matter if it was earlier or later. The most important thing was not to cause trouble. Safety first, safety first. Soon he saw a row of bull riders passing through the middle of the road from the window of the carriage. There were at least 30 of them, and they seemed to be guarding someone. Soon he saw the person being escorted through the gaps in the group of knights. Although it was only the back view, he could still easily recognize it. It seems that Qi Zixiao treats him pretty well. Ning Kaichen touched his chin and muttered to himself. He actually had 30 earth wheel experts as his bodyguards. Even most of the princes of Great Xia didn't have such treatment. It's really important to find a good wife. Ning Kaichen began to ponder whether there were any powerful princesses in Great Xia who hadn't married yet. Even if they were slightly older, it wasn't impossible to consider them. This was the life of his dreams. After that group of people disappeared, Ning Kaichen then said to the white-haired old man, "Old Huang, turn right after crossing 2 streets and go to the Honglu Bureau." Renbaqian naturally didn't notice an old friend by the roadside. At this moment, he jumped down from the fork-horned cow with a face full of joy. He carried an item wrapped in cloth and ran excitedly to Yangxin Palace Hall. "Your Majesty, it's done, it's finally done." Renbaqian laughed heartily as he strode into Yangxin Palace Hall. At this moment, the Empress's entire body was sunk into the sofa. The sofa was made from the skin of a sharp-toothed tiger. In front of her was a wooden coffee table with a laptop on top. The springs in this world weren't very good. After choosing, Renbaqian chose a type of spring that wasn't very hard. Coupled with the large amount of cotton that he brought from Earth, it was very easy for people to sink into it while sitting on it. However, the Empress liked it this way. It was very comfortable for her to sink into the sofa. When Renbaqian ran into the palace hall, the Empress didn't even turn her head. She was completely focused on the laptop. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan stood behind the sofa and glared at Renbaqian. Is it worth it to exchange 1,000 years of your cultivation for 10 years of his life? There's no such thing as whether it's worth it or not. Only whether I'm willing or not. Renbaqian was speechless. He walked to the side of the sofa and took a look. As expected, the Empress was still reading The Legend of Sword and Fairy. It wasn't until Tsai transformed into a butterfly and left that Lu Jinyuan, who was in a coma, shed a tear. The eyes of Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan turned red. Renbaqian's face was full of vigor. Was she that touched? What's the matter? Is it done? The Empress acted as if she had just found out about Renbaqian. Your Majesty, national affairs are more important. Renbaqian lamented. I know. The Empress waved her hand indifferently. Sigh. Renbaqian sighed. Recently, the Empress seemed to have opened the door to a new world. As long as she didn't attend court, she would curl up on the sofa and watch television series. As for Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan, they were like the Empress's little tails, following her every day to watch television series. Your Majesty, it's done. Renbaqian adjusted his mood and placed the cloth bag on the coffee table, with a proud look on his face. He opened the bag and revealed 2 round glasses. Why do they look a little green? The Empress asked curiously as she picked up the cup. She had seen a lot of glass cups, so she didn't find it strange. However, the cup that Renbaqian took out was made by the glass factory outside Lan City, so it naturally had a different meaning. Even Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan didn't look too surprised. They had even watched television series before. Even though this kind of cup carved from gemstones was precious, it wouldn't make a fuss about it. Both of them had seen the world before. It should be because of the iron in the raw material. We just have to think of a way to remove it later, Renbachian said happily. Since the glass cups were made, it would be much easier to make them later. However, the biggest problem now was that the furnace fire wasn't very stable, so the success rate was relatively low. This required the workers of the glass factory to try it out bit by bit, and it would probably improve after a period of time. This month, the glass factory was finally built and successfully made the first batch of cups today. However, only a few of them were in good condition, and the two that Renbachian brought were in the best condition. Can the sun furnace be made? The Empress still remembered the term that Renbachian mentioned. In fact, she had learned a lot of words from Earth and some Chinese characters. Well, she learned all of them through television series. She also learned a few words in Russian and English. I want this, in other words, it was, I want this. Well, she basically only talked to Renbachian. This was the sentence that she most often said to people outside. After a few more days, when the craftsmen are more familiar with it, it will be ready. Renbachian nodded. Since the glass was made, the first thing to do was to make the solar furnace. After all, the requirements for making it weren't too high. Previously, when he was in Shurcheng, he had already obtained the installation angle blueprint and the mold for the concave mirror. After making the concave mirror, he just had to brush the silver at the back. He had almost memorized the entire set of techniques. While making the concave mirror, he could also train the craftsmen. After that, he could make pure glass products and sell them for money. One had to know that the precious items in the imperial treasury were still there, but more than half of the gold, silver, and jewels were gone. There wasn't much to begin with, and the Empress used it to purchase weapons. The last time Renbachian went to the imperial treasury, he saw that it was actually a gift for the Empress's birthday. Now a portion of the medicinal ingredients were used on Renbachian and the glass factory. More than half of the money was used. Renbachian only discovered this when he went to the imperial treasury with the Empress recently. Previously, the Empress didn't even mention this to him. This made Renbachian feel a little touched, but also a little helpless. If she had mentioned this earlier, he could have brought a bag of nail clippers back and sold it for a lot of money. Chapter 259. One on Earth. Every city was brightly lit at night. However, in places where the lights couldn't reach, there were often some evil things happening. For example, at the border of our country, in a city that was rich in beauties, two bald youths were pointing a gun at a bruised yellow-skinned, black-haired youth. Their faces were filled with ridicule. "Khitan people, I hate you. You should scram back to where you belong." A bald youth cursed drunkenly. The black-haired youth's face was filled with fear. He knew who he had met. Those youths were known as the skinheads. They were affiliated with radical parties and held strong hostility towards all outsiders. It wasn't just yellow-skinned Chinese or Vietnamese like him. There were also black-haired people from the Caucasus region, as well as Africans and South Americans. If he met them, he would be punched and kicked. If it was serious, he might even lose his life. 2 years ago, someone was even stabbed to death at the entrance of the university. Now he only hoped that these two people would let him go. At this moment, his heart was filled with fear and regret. He shouldn't have come out alone at night. However, he was muddle-headed and wasted time with that junior sister. "I have an interesting game. Why don't we play it?" The other bald youth had a malicious smile on his face. He tapped the revolver with his finger, and the magazine immediately popped out. He slowly inserted 3 bullets into it. There was an empty space between every 2 bullets. His other hand slid on the magazine. The magazine immediately spun. Then he swung the magazine back to its original position. "Let's play a game. As long as you don't die, we will let you go." The bald youth had a face filled with malice and ridicule as he pointed the gun at the black-haired youth. The black-haired youth was almost paralyzed on the ground. His face was filled with fear. 3 bullets and 3 empty spaces. In other words, there was a 50% chance that he would die. The other 50% might not be a good result. The other 2 people looked at the terrified expression of him paralyzed on the ground and let out a burst of laughter. This game is very interesting. I also want to play. At this moment, a man's voice suddenly came from the entrance of the alley. He spoke in broken Russian, word by word. Who are you? Come out. The bald young man turned around and pointed the gun at him. But just as he turned around, he saw a figure rush into his arms at an extremely fast speed and hit him heavily in the abdomen. Another hand grabbed his wrist and pulled, and the gun was in the other party's hand. Before he could do anything else, the man punched him in the ear again, making him unable to move half of his body and seeing stars. His companion was in an even worse state. A woman in red descended from the sky and stomped him to the ground. One could even hear the sound of his bones breaking. Get lost, we islanders hate you pigs the most. Rinpoche held the gun in his hand and pointed at the black-haired man who looked like an exchange student from China. Rinpoche was still speaking in poor Russian. The black-haired youth was dumbfounded at first. Then he scrambled away, not daring to look back. After running far away, he still had a baffled look on his face. Was that person really a Japanese? Why did he save her? But at that time, that person's back was to the light. Rinpoche actually didn't see that person's face and didn't know who that person was. Rinpoche stepped on the bald young man's head, then lowered his head and took out bullets from his pocket. He loaded 2 more bullets and slid the magazine back to its original position. I like this game. If you don't die, I will let you off. Rinpoche smiled. He had seen many of these bald young men in our nation. A month had passed in Dayo. During this period, he came back 6 times and stayed in our nation for almost a month. He didn't know if he was unlucky or if others were unlucky. Maybe it was because he always came out at night, or the Empress was too eye-catching. In a month, he met a total of 7 such violent young men. Most of them were between 15 and 20 years old. They were very childish and immature. They were muddled by some slogans and their minds were filled with violence. In Rinpoche's heart, they were just a bunch of kids. Therefore, he must not let them off. Without waiting for the youth to speak, Rinpoche immediately pulled the trigger. Bang! The gunshot was very loud. I'm sorry, your luck isn't very good. Rinpoche said apologetically to the sakama with ketchup at his feet. The youth under the Empress's feet struggled with all his might. At this moment, he had already sobered up from the alcohol, and was trying his best to break free from the person behind him. However, that person was like a nail nailed him to the ground, and he couldn't move no matter what. I'm sorry, spare me, spare me. That bald young man cried with all his might. It's just a game. Why is there such a big reaction? Rinpoche was flabbergasted. Following which, he comforted him gently. Be good and listen to me. I am a man of my words. After this shot, I will let you off regardless of whether you die or not. After he finished speaking, he pointed the gun at the other party's head. With a look of disgust, the Empress flashed and appeared a few meters away. Bang! I'm sorry, both of your luck isn't very good. It seems like this game isn't very fun. Rinpoche apologized to the 2 piles of sakama with ketchup. Following which, he stuffed the gun into his waist. The pedestrians who were attracted by the gunshot immediately screamed in fear when they saw the empty alley and the 2 piles of sakama. After a while, before the local police arrived, 3 young men and women with black hair and yellow skin dashed into the alley and carefully examined the scene. Was it done by them? One of the women asked quickly. This person's shoulder blade is broken. It seems like it was crushed by someone stepping on it. There is also some mud here. The outline is a footprint. It's most likely done by them. Damn it, they got away again. That woman cursed angrily. It had been 3 months. For 3 whole months, the other party had never restrained himself. Wherever he went, he would cause all kinds of incidents. Most of them were still murder cases. They had been tracking for 3 months, and every time, they missed by a hair's breadth. They couldn't even catch a glimpse of the other party's back. Every one of them was proficient in one or more of computer, tracking, fighting, firearms, infiltration, information analysis, and driving cars and planes. Every one of them was an elite among the elites. However, they couldn't even catch a glimpse of the other party's tail, and were being played around in circles by the other party. At this moment, it wasn't just the 3 of them. There was another team of 3 people, who were also looking for the traces of the other 2 people. This clearly meant that they were incompetent. When they thought about it, they felt that it was simply a humiliation. Now they had almost forgotten their original intention of looking for the other party. All they could think of was to catch them and wash away this humiliation. If the other party had absconded obediently, they might not have been so angry. However, the other party had never concealed his whereabouts. He swaggered around unscrupulously, but they couldn't even catch a glimpse of the other party's tail. How could they be convinced? On top of a tall building not far away, Renbachian used a pair of binoculars to look at the 3 people coming out of the alley. He said with great interest, "They seem to have been chasing for a long time and haven't given up yet." Following which he complained, "There are so many cases in the country waiting for them to handle. I have already run so far away. Do they have to chase me so relentlessly? It seems like I haven't posted on my WeChat moments for a long time." Renbachian thought for a while. In any case, the other party had been following behind him. Even if he didn't post, they would still know where he was. Thinking of this, Renbachian switched on the phone that he hadn't used for a long time. Then, he aimed it at himself and the building behind him and revealed a bright smile. Zixiao smile. Renbachian didn't forget to turn around and shout. The Empress only rolled her eyes at him. The Ren family. These days, Papa Ren and Mama Ren had been worried about their son. They didn't know how he was doing and were afraid that something had happened to him. At this moment, Papa Ren's phone suddenly rang. He picked it up with a start and realized that it was Ren Wanyan, who had just entered university. Sigh. Papa Ren sighed. He had been waiting for his eldest son to call him for some time. "Dad, quickly look at WeChat. Brother has posted on his WeChat moments." Papa Ren heard his youngest son shouting excitedly when he answered the phone. "What?" Papa Ren was shocked. He quickly opened WeChat to check his WeChat moments and saw the photo that the person he wanted to see the most had just posted. Under the dim light of the night, the background was filled with exotic architecture. Renbachian faced the camera with a bright smile, and even made a very old-fashioned peace sign. Not far behind him was the profile of a woman in red with her long hair fluttering in the wind. There was also a short paragraph below. "The scenery is not bad, but the temperature is a little low and cold. In addition, it has been cloudy recently. Everyone, don't forget to collect the clothes when it rains." Papa Ren and Mama Ren were stunned when they saw Renbachian's WeChat moments. The Chun family. Chen Qing and Jiang Nan were also stunned when they saw Renbachian's WeChat moments. This person was simply invincible. He actually dared to swagger and post on his WeChat moments when he was on the run? How much did he want to die? In a car on the street, 2 men and a woman looked gloomy. As the phone rang, the older man lowered his head and looked at the phone. It was a familiar number. He had just reported the situation in the morning. Why was he calling at this time? When he picked up the phone with a gloomy face and heard the content clearly, his face turned as black as the bottom of a pot. A moment later, he received 2 pictures on his phone. On the pictures was Renbachian's bright smile, and that paragraph. The 3 of them looked at the pictures on the phone, and their faces turned as black as the bottom of a pot. Chapter 260. 1. 2 days later, Renbachian and the Empress sat on a train, listening to the rumbling of the train as they toured the rural scenery of this foreign country. They had already left our nation, and left on the same night. They first passed through Belarus, which was rich in beauties, then Poland, and finally came to this country. Their destination was the most suitable city for lovers to visit, Prague. Renbachian had an impression of this city after listening to the song Prague Square. When he chose his route, he specifically chose this city. Ouch, it's so cold. Renbachian wrapped his coat tightly, and his face turned red from the cold. The Czech Republic wasn't too cold in early October. The temperature was about 16 or 17 degrees Celsius, but anyone who sat on a train and was exposed to the cold wind for an hour would feel very cold. Yes, on the train. Renbachian and the Empress were on the train and not inside it. The oncoming wind rushed straight into Renbachian's mouth. Now his strength was about 150 kilograms, and he was much stronger than before. However, this didn't mean that he wasn't afraid of the cold. On the contrary, the Empress, who was at the side, wasn't affected at all by the temperature and the cold wind. Her skirt and hair were blown to the back and danced along with the wind. The Empress had a satisfied expression on her face. She squinted her eyes and hugged her knees. Renbachian realized that the Empress would squint her eyes when she was satisfied, and when she wanted to kill someone. The difference was that when she was satisfied, her nose would wrinkle slightly, but when she wanted to kill someone, the corners of her eyes would rise. It was a very subtle difference. As the front of the train entered the tunnel, the two of them lay flat on the roof of the carriage, and waited to sit up after exiting the tunnel. Since I have nothing to do, let's tease them again. With a malicious smile on his face, Renbachian took out the old phone from his pocket and switched it on. Then he sent a photo of himself and the wilderness behind him. It feels colder today, and my face is almost frozen. Traveling by train in this season isn't a good choice. Renbachian ignored the fact that he was on the train and not inside it. He sent the photo along with this message and switched off his phone. After a while, Papa Ren, Mama Ren, Chin-Ching, Jiangnan, a certain department was in a state of chaos. Quickly find out where he is. The trio that had been following behind Renbachian and eating his dust immediately received 2 pictures. Their faces turned as black as the bottom of a pot. Ever since they accepted this mission, the 3 of them felt that they were in a bad mood. It was as if they were living between being teased and trying their best to be teased every day. 3 whole months. No matter who it was, they would go crazy after being teased for 3 months. Ho Yong, where are they? As soon as he received the pictures, the older man among the 3 received a call. As soon as the call connected, he was bombarded with a series of questions. Ho Yong's face darkened. They must have left country R. According to the route, they should be in Belarus now. Find him. Ho Yong hung up the phone and gritted his teeth. He also wanted to find him, but the closest he got was not even a glimpse of his back. Where is he going? Although Ho Yong was furious, he still took out the map and compared the previous route. The cities that the 2 of them had been to before had all been marked. It was a zigzag curve, completely unlike the other fugitives who had a destination. Instead, it was as if they were really on a sightseeing tour. After entering country R from country M, they went as far north as Dixon Island, which was close to the Arctic Circle. They also went to Moscow and stayed there for 2 days, leaving behind a murder case. Then they went south to the border of Ukraine before turning west to a border city near Belarus. Not only did their movements seem like they were on a sightseeing tour, but they also had no clear destination. Every 10 days they would commit a murder case. It could be said that they were the poorest, most vicious, and most unscrupulous fugitives that he had seen all these years. At this moment, Renbachian covered his face with both hands and was deep in thought. Finally, he revealed his major discovery. Zixiao, I think I've been cursed by the Bichi. The Empress turned to look at him and said faintly, Didn't you already know? Renbachian sighed. Ever since he met the Bichi, he was captured by the flower eagle, tried to assassinate, and poisoned. It wasn't easy for him to cure the poison, and he was chased and intercepted in Great Xia. When he finally returned to Dayo, he encountered a murderer, and then Jin Jun. In the end, he ended up as a wanted criminal. This wasn't the end. Originally, his goal had always been to run away obediently and live a peaceful life. However, no matter where he went, he would encounter trouble. He would be robbed, attacked, robbed sometimes. Renbachian couldn't help but wonder why the security in country R was so bad. It was a big country after all. How did the Chinese who worked and studied in country R survive there? Fortunately, he had finally left that country with terrible security and would never go there again. Renbachian recalled what happened in the past few months and felt that he was simply too unlucky. Other people might not encounter even once in their lifetime, but he had encountered all of them in a few months. He wouldn't believe that the Bichi didn't play a part in this. Wasn't it said that misfortune and blessing came hand in hand? Why was there only misfortune and no blessing? Where was the blessing? The only thing that gave him a little comfort was that he wasn't the one who died. How long will the curse of the Bichi last? Rinpoche couldn't help but ask. 3 to 5 years at the very least, and I don't know how long it will take, the Empress said faintly. She then added, with me around you won't die. Rinpoche felt warmth in his heart. He grabbed the Empress's hand. Pow. Rinpoche looked at his hand, which had become swollen like a pig's trotter, and lamented, Zixiao, it's swollen. The Empress snorted and couldn't be bothered to look at him. When they saw the city in front of them, the Empress carried Rinpoche and appeared by the roadside in a flash. I'm standing in the square at dusk in Prague, casting my hope in the wishing pond, the flock of white pigeons with their backs facing the setting sun. The scene is too beautiful for me to look at. Rinpoche hummed a tune as he and the Empress arrived at their destination, Prague. Ho Yong held the map and studied it for a long time. He casually asked the young lady beside him, Cece, if it were you, where would you like to go in the vicinity? Cece glanced at the map and said without hesitation, Brago. That's the most suitable city for lovers and relaxation. Ho Yong slapped his thigh. Weren't they a pair of lovers? They had been inseparable for the past few months. They often went to the supermarket together, and even went to Turkey together. Who would believe that they weren't lovers? In that case, their target was most likely to be Prague. Quick, book the plane tickets immediately. After finishing his sentence, he called his superior and said, I suspect that their target is Prague. I'm rushing over now. The other party was silent for a while. Then he said in a relaxed tone, Team 2 has reached Prague yesterday. You guys should set off quickly. You must find them. The piano keys are shining with light. Shining with light. Painted glass windows. Decorated Gothic churches. Who played a piece of music. A piece of wandering sorrow. Looking at the direction of the music, roses were attached to an oil painting from the 18th century. Quietly admiring at the side. Thinking about your romance. Seeing if it's the same for how long. At this moment, Rinpoche felt that he had maxed out his hip-hop talent. However, in the eyes of the Empress, his hip-hop talent was nothing more than a long-winded mumble. Walking into this colorful city, he felt his heart lighten up. However, he still had to buy some ointment like safflower oil that could remove blood stasis and dissolve blood stasis. Chapter 261. Rinpoche was wearing a jacket, jeans, canvas shoes, and carrying a small bag. He looked no different from an ordinary young man who was traveling. If there was any difference, it would be that his female companion was simply too beautiful. It made people cast sidelong glances and endlessly envious of him. On the other hand, the Empress was wearing a red dress that revealed her arms. In such weather, the people around her felt very cold, but she didn't seem to be aware of it at all. Both of them strolled along the streets of the new district of Prague. Occasionally, the Empress would see beautiful clothes in the display window and would faintly say, Here. Once again, the Empress entered a shop that was filled with an exotic style. She paused for a moment in front of a bohemian-style long dress. It was a red dress with blue, white, and black interwoven flowers on it. At the same time, there were white tulle and tassels below the neckline. It was filled with an exotic style and perfectly accentuated the charm of a woman. The Empress stood in front of this dress and scrutinized it for a moment. She had a rare look of hesitation on her face. It could be seen that she liked this dress very much, but she had never worn such a style before. Most of her dresses were bright red. There weren't too many complicated colors, and the style was relatively simple. Many dresses only had a slight difference in the neckline and cuffs. The colors of this dress were too dazzling, and the style was also very complicated. Zixiao, you will definitely look very good in this dress. In this world, there are only clothes that don't match up to you. And there are no clothes that don't look good on you, Rinpoche said gently. He really wanted to see the Empress wearing such a feminine dress. It would definitely be very alluring. Rinpoche said in a gentle and bewitching voice. However, he was right about one thing. A beautiful person would look good in anything they wore. No matter how old-fashioned the clothes were, the Empress would be able to wear them with the feeling of a runway. After a while, the Empress changed into a dress and walked out of the fitting room. Rinpoche immediately exclaimed in admiration and applauded. Wow! There's no one more beautiful than you in this world. You are the only one, the most resplendent one. I'm sure of it. At this moment, the Empress was wearing an exotic floral dress. The curves of her upper body were completely revealed, and her hair was scattered on her shoulders and back. The corners of her eyes and the tips of her eyebrows carried a trace of gentleness. Her entire being was filled with the charm of a woman. She was gorgeous, and it was difficult for people to take their eyes off her. Renbachian wasn't the only one. Even the shop owner at the side, a young lady in her 20s, exclaimed in admiration. She quickly ran to the side to retrieve a sky-blue shawl with lace patterns, and placed it on the Empress's shoulder. Then she stood at the side and smiled. There was a tinge of jealousy in her smile. While the Empress was standing in front of the mirror, and sizing up her slightly different self, Renbachian had already paid the bill. The price wasn't expensive. The dress and the shawl cost around 700 euros. On the Empress, it made people feel that there should be 2 zeros at the back of the dress. The Empress wasn't used to it after putting it on, and wanted to change back into her dress. He stopped her and said, "You should let the whole world know how beautiful you are. Besides, a change of style can also change my mood." The Empress pondered for a while and didn't insist. Renbachian conveniently took a straw hat from the side, and placed it on the Empress's head. It matched the dress very well. As the saying went, a beautiful person would look good in anything. Even a cotton-padded jacket could bring out the vibe of a fashion week. "Can I take a photo?" the shop owner suddenly asked. "What?" Renbachian didn't really understand the other party's broken English. Of course, even if the other party's English wasn't broken, it would still be very difficult for him to understand. The other party took out his phone and switched it to the photo mode. Renbachian then understood. "Zixiao, she wants to keep your beauty," Renbachian said to the Empress with a smile. The Empress held the hat with one hand, and allowed the shop owner to take a photo. Then the two of them left the place. Prague was very small. It was more than 400 square kilometers. A level 5 city in Renbachian's hometown was 40 times the size of Prague. This place was only equivalent to the size of a district in a level 5 city. As the two of them moved forward, the road beneath their feet began to turn into a stone road. It wasn't made of flagstones but small stones. If the soles of their shoes weren't thick enough, the soles of their feet would hurt a little. The temperature wasn't considered high. It was about 17 or 18 degrees Celsius, but it was a sunny and beautiful day. There were always groups of tourists sitting at the tables by the roadside in the cafe. They didn't feel cold at all. Most of them were young couples. There were also friends or families that came here to play. The entire city gave off a very relaxed, leisurely, and comfortable feeling. Renbachian and the Empress found a cafe and sat down. The Empress held a cup of yogurt and slowly sipped on it. When the dessert was served, she immediately diverted her attention. She tried it once, but she didn't like the taste of coffee. Instead, she liked the yogurt. Another thing that never changed was the dessert and candy. On the crowded Charles Bridge, two people stood at both ends of the bridge. There was another person standing in the middle of the bridge, inspecting the crowd. It's very likely that they have already reached Prague. The photo that person posted on his WeChat Moments just now should be of an area north of Prague. The satellite photo is 90% similar. Pay more attention, especially to the lady in red. The man in the middle of the bridge was handsome, amiable, and had a faint smile on his face. It was very easy for people to let down their guard against him. At this moment, he spoke to the other two through the microphone on his collar. There were too many people here. There were also many black-haired and yellow-skinned Chinese people. The lady in red was a more obvious target. Since her appearance, although the style of her dress had changed slightly, the color had never changed. People couldn't help but wonder how much she liked the color red. With her ostentatious and unscrupulous behavior, no one thought that she would change her clothes and hide her whereabouts. "Got it," the other two answered one after another. "Remember, if you find them, don't rashly come into contact with them. Inform me immediately. Also, don't provoke them. They are very dangerous. They are vicious, merciless, and unscrupulous," the man warned again. "Understood." The other two naturally knew how dangerous these two people were. The information that they received from time to time over the past few days had already explained how crazy and ruthless they were. I will give you a holiday after we return. The man leaned on the bridge and smiled at the passers-by, causing several blonde and blue-eyed beauties to look interested. Boss, you seem to be raising flags, a man complained. You talk too much. Hey, handsome, do you have time for a cup of coffee? A young girl who looked at most 20 years old and was full of energy came forward to strike up a conversation. Although I really want to go, it's a pity that I'm waiting for someone now, the man said apologetically. His voice was full of magnetism, and his every movement exuded a hormonal aura. The girl's eyes were almost sparkling. This is my phone number. You must call me when you meet the person. The girl took out a pen and wrote a series of numbers on the back of the man's hand. The man kissed the phone number on the back of his hand and smiled, causing the girl's eyes to light up. Boss, you are picking up girls again. I'm being picked up, the man corrected. There's no justice in this world. Don't be distracted. This trip isn't for fun, but for work. Pay more attention to the lady in red. The man repeated his words tirelessly. Looking at the sea of people on Charlie Bridge, he felt as if he had encountered the Golden Week. He had only seen the terrifying sea of people at the tourist attractions during the Golden Week on the internet before. At first he didn't have the money, but later on he didn't have the opportunity. Now he actually felt it in a foreign country. Not only were there many Caucasians here, but there were also many black-haired and yellow-skinned Chinese people. He even saw a group of Little Red Riding Hoods. So many people. The Empress sighed as she looked at the sea of people in front of her. The old city area in front is the most beautiful. Rinpoche looked into the distance. Then the two of them blended into this sea of people. 2 meters away from the two of them, a man wearing a hat was looking around in the crowd. Rinpoche, Qi Zixiao, the lady in red. Rinpoche and Qi Zixiao's faces were blocked by a few tall young Caucasians in front of them. When those young people got out of the way, the man only saw a blue shawl and a straw hat in the crowd and looked away. Chapter 262. Rinpoche and the Empress walked on Charles Bridge. The Empress activated her halo again, and a bone-chilling coldness was emitted from her position. Everyone subconsciously kept a distance of half a meter away from her. This was the subconscious instinct of the surrounding people, and even most people didn't realize this. Although the bridge was like a sea of heads, it was not to the extent that people were rubbing shoulders with each other, so no one noticed this gap. After walking for a short distance, the two of them saw the source of the music and drumming that they had been hearing. A man was sitting on the edge of the bridge, beating a hand drum with one hand and blowing a 1.5-meter-long pipe at the same time. The sound of the hand drum gave the tune a very hollow and distant feeling. The sound of the hand drum made the tune even more primitive. The two of them sized it up for a moment before passing by. There are 30 statues of saints on both sides of the Charles Bridge, each representing a story. As Rinpoche walked, he told the story of the statue to the Empress. He was completely looking at his phone as he was telling the story. He wasn't very qualified as a tour guide and wasn't very dutiful either. After telling the story of the statue, he lost interest and immediately stuffed his phone into his pocket. The Empress didn't understand these histories and allusions. She couldn't feel the deep cultural heritage and didn't care at all. Of course, Rinpoche couldn't feel it. However, the scenery along the coast from the bridge was very beautiful, especially the old city on the other side of the bridge. There were red and white houses everywhere, and tall Gothic towers. These exotic buildings were more beautiful than the statues. He took out his old cell phone and switched it on. Then he stuck close to the Empress and said, "Zixiao, smile." On the screen, one of them had a bright smile on his face, while the other was exquisite and beautiful. Both of them were looking into the distance. The background of the two was a sea of people, and the statue of the saint on Charles Bridge. The weather's great, but there are too many people. Rinpoche switched off his phone after posting the post. Papa run. Mama run. Chin-ching. A certain department. Everyone was speechless. It was rare for someone to run to this extent. Papa Run and Mama Run were speechless as they looked at the photo on the cell phone. This guy was alive and kicking and had a cheerful look on his face. It was impossible to tell that he was a wanted man. The two of them didn't know if they should be relieved or worried. At least for now, Renbachian seemed pretty good. But if he continued to jump around like this, he wouldn't be far from going to prison. The two of them were still full of reverence for their country. Who is this? This woman is really beautiful, even more beautiful than a celebrity. Run Wanyan was sitting in his dormitory with a very interesting expression on his face, as if he was constipated. As soon as his roommate turned around and saw his expression, he immediately leaned over to take a look at the photo on the phone. Then he was shocked. My brother and his girlfriend, Run Wanyan guessed. It should be. At the very least, Run Bachian could see the shadow of this woman in his WeChat moments. Awesome. You must let me see your sister-in-law in person if I have the chance. I want to see the difference between the real person and the photo. The roommate immediately patted him on the shoulder. Run Wanyan didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't even know what to say. Was he going to tell her that his brother was on the run because he was wanted by the entire country? Looking at the smug and brilliant smile on his face, how could anyone tell? And he still had the mood to post it on his moments? She had worried for nothing. In the middle of the bridge, a handsome man was leaning against the side of the bridge, his eyes scanning the crowd. Occasionally, he would exchange glances with the beautiful women passing by, and he would nod and smile. Then, when someone asked for his phone number, he would politely refuse. This had already happened 5 or 6 times. What a beautiful woman. His eyes suddenly fixed on a face under a straw hat in the crowd, and he couldn't help but exclaim in admiration. After so many years of experience, this woman was also the best of the best. In particular, the indifference on her face made people want to conquer her even more. Then he realized that this face was a little familiar. His eyes lit up as he said, "It's her. They are here." At this moment his phone rang. After hesitating for a while, he quickly picked it up. "Shindu, they are on Charles Bridge. I've seen it." Shindu said quickly and hung up the phone. At the same time, he said to the other 2 people, "The target has appeared. He is at my position." First, he quickly advanced parallel to Rinpochian, and then cut in front of them. "Can the 2 of you talk for a while? I mean no harm." Shindu spread out his hands and said. Previously, he had always wanted to meet the 2 people in a more remote place where it would be more convenient to talk. However, he suddenly felt that such a crowded place was actually better. At least in such a crowded place, the other party wouldn't kill him without saying a word, right? Furthermore, it wouldn't be that easy for them to escape. Not interested. Run Bachian loathed the other party as soon as he saw him. He hated gigolos the most in this life. It shouldn't take up too much of your time. Furthermore, it will be beneficial for you. Don't you want to return to China? Shindu said with a smile. His voice was magnetic and very peaceful. It didn't carry any hostility or make people feel threatened. If it were someone else, they would probably have a good impression of him. For such a person, no matter who it was, no one would dislike him. However, Renbachian hated him even more. "I'm not representing myself. It's not me who wants to talk to you, but the nation." Shindu smiled and said to the Empress. It had to be said that Shindu was very good at communicating with people. First, he showed that he wasn't hostile. Second, he showed that he knew the other party's identity, but didn't point it out so that the other party wouldn't suddenly explode. Finally, he brought up the killer weapon of the nation. His words could make people's imaginations run wild, and want to hear him continue. Especially to 2 people who were being hunted down. Rinbachian's brain quickly turned twice, trying to guess what the other party meant. The other party was representing the nation? The nation wanted to talk to the 2 of them? About what? What did the nation know? "You look very much like someone I hate," the Water Empress suddenly said. The smile that Shindu had been maintaining suddenly froze. "This isn't important. I'm not that person. What's important is to talk to the nation. It's only beneficial for you." "I hate him too. Renbaqian turned his head and said to the Empress with his eyebrows knitted together. He really hated this person. If there was a reason, it would be that he was too handsome. What surprised him was that the Empress had already expressed her hatred for him before he even saw her. At this moment, Shendu's smile was really stiff. He completely didn't know how he offended these two people. The next second, Shendu drew an arc and fell into the river under the bridge. Chief! Another man who had just squeezed out from the crowd saw the scene and immediately shouted. Then he also fell in an arc. The surrounding people were completely shocked by this scene. Only a small number of people saw that it was the woman wearing the straw hat who threw the two people into the river. Most of them still didn't understand what happened. I'm your brother, and I won't watch the two of you get married. It's simply a disgrace for two men to get married. Both of you better calm down. Renbaqian leaned on the stone railing and shouted to the people below. Some of the surrounding people who understood suddenly came to a realization and rushed to the side of the bridge. There were also people who were good at English who translated what Renbaqian shouted to the others. The people nearby were worried at first, but when they saw the two people emerging from the water, they gave their blessings to the two people below the bridge. Applause rang out from the surrounding people. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.